Ready? Okay, everybody. Bore da, my name is Councillor Cheryl Carlisle and I'm the Chair of the Finance and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting, which is a multi-location meeting. The meeting will be live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and a recording will be available through the Council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I remind members that translation facilities are available and for those attending remotely to choose your language of choice. For those wishing to speak in the chamber, please raise your hand. For those attending remotely, please use the raised hand function. We will alternate between speakers in the chamber and remote attendees. For those attending remotely, please note that those in the chamber will be unable to use the chat facility. Committee members who are attending remotely are required to leave their camera on throughout the debate and when voting in order to maintain the integrity of the decision-making process. If you do need to leave the meeting temporarily, pop a message in the chat function so the Democratic Services Officer is aware and then let us know when you return. Can I stress that I expect everyone present and participating in this meeting to conduct themselves appropriately and be respectful to each other. That applies to members, officers and anyone in the public gallery. When I open up the debate to members, I will ask committee members to speak and put their questions first, followed by non-committee members. Whilst I do not wish to stifle debate, can I remind members that any questions should be focused on the subject matter and to avoid repetition. If I feel the length of individual speeches are negatively impacting on the overall time for discussion and becoming unmanageable, I will defer to the committee's rules of procedure, which limits the length of speeches to 5 minutes. There we go. It's the morning. We'll go to item 1, please. Apologies for absence.
Apologies have been received from councillors Frank Bradfield and Andrew Wood.
Thank you, Sally. Any more from anyone? No. Okay, we move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Any declaration of interest, members? No. Okay. Item 3, urgent matters. I'm not aware of any urgent matters. We then move on to item 4, the minutes, pages 3 to 11 of the meeting held on 22nd of January 2024. Could I have a proposer and a seconder for those minutes, please? Thank you, Councillor Sharon. Councillor Paul, would everyone like to show? Thank you. Those are passed. We now move on to item 5, question to the Cabinet Member for Education from Councillor Harry Saville. Councillor Harry.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So what discussions does the Cabinet Member have with the finance portfolio holder about schools' budget planning requirements when delivering the Council's budget planning framework?
Okay, thank you, Harry, for your question. So the Cabinet Member for Finance, who obviously also happens to be the leader, and I work incredibly well together, very closely with discussions around obviously finances, both within the Education Department and with schools. And I have to thank the leader actually, and we'll take this opportunity due to your question for the support of working through what we all know has been an incredibly difficult period, not just the last 12 months, but certainly through the COVID pandemic as well. And thanks to Councillor Mike, who obviously held the finance portfolio before that. There are numerous places where we have the opportunity to discuss schools' budgets and their position within the council overall. So we have the school budget forum. This now includes a pre-meet with the chair, where we discuss school finances and what schools themselves want to discuss at the school budget forum, which I think is really important. We meet far more regularly. They have the opportunity to look at the agenda that is in scrutiny, whether that's finance and resources or education scrutiny, so they can see what's coming up that democratically we'll be making decisions on, so that they can feed into that. Amanda also updates on the current financial position at every school budget forum, so that schools understand where we are as a local authority and what the likelihood may be on decisions taken going forward. The head teacher engagement meeting we also have, that was introduced by myself and the former leader Sam Rowlands some time ago, to address that, I think, moving forward, how schools can feel a part of the local authority in order to understand what the financial position is across all services, and what the likelihood may be for schools going forward. And that's been really powerful. And then that gives us the opportunity right then and there to understand what are the implications in the classroom, what are the implications on their budgets, and that's been really powerful. We've also obviously had the education budget working group, which was well attended. Then we had the schools budget working group, and we had a large number of head teachers there, which was really positive to give us the perspective of the smaller schools, the larger schools, rural, Welsh schools, special schools, the Pro. They were all represented there, and obviously members had the opportunity to go along to form part of that discussion and again understand where we were financially, and obviously it was chaired by the leader. Informal cabinet, we have many discussions around where the budget is, what the implications for that may be for all services, obviously including education and schools in particular. We also have myself and Lowry meet fortnightly to discuss anything education and school related, and then anything that I think is pertinent I relay back to the leader, and if we think there are going to be issues that we need to look at further, then we do. I often meet with David, who's the head of finance for schools and educational support in that area. So, you know, I think we really have it covered. Charlie and I, when Charlie became leader, and consistently through his time as leader, have visited schools. That's an opportunity for schools to talk to us about their finances, and also to point out specific things, whether that's with the maintenance of the building or the impact of classrooms, anything really. And that's been really helpful. You know, it's given us a good understanding as to what position schools are in, and certainly in terms of the plans schools have going forward. We have redundancy panels, pretty much weekly at the minute, in order to support schools at looking at what approach they can take. So yeah, I think that should hopefully explain to you a certain amount that takes place. Thank you, Harry.
Yeah, and Julie, first of all, thank you for that. It's actually reassuring to understand that level of discussion that goes on between cabinet officers and schools around some financial challenges that they're facing. Now, I think you mentioned in your answer that, of course, this year is particularly challenging from a financial perspective. And regrettably, some schools are having to look at making redundancies. Now, as I understand it, schools have been told that the deadline for starting the redundancy process is tomorrow. Yet at some point in the communication between the council and schools around what they can expect in terms of their budget for the next financial year, they've been told they won't have a final figure until the 29th. So they're having to start that particularly challenging redundancy process before they actually know whether or not they need to go down that route. Now, this seems to me to be something that should have been picked up in this council's budget planning framework. I'm conscious that that's something agreed by cabinet, but will have come through this committee as well. So it's something where I think we could all collectively focus on and see if we can resolve this for next year. But I wonder, are you able to give us any sort of commitment today that this will be looked at ahead of the budgetary process for next year to see if we can at least streamline the process or make it flow better for schools so they're a bit more certain around the decisions they're having to make in these particularly challenging circumstances?
Thanks, Harry. And obviously anything that we can do to support our schools, we will absolutely do that. In terms of, obviously it's really difficult, isn't it? Because, you know, and this has been the case certainly since I took the portfolio, we are somewhat restricted in terms of we don't get the autumn statement until obviously late into the autumn. We then have so many weeks for Welsh Government to put together what their budget looks like. And we all know that we didn't get the figure, which isn't even fully the final figure, obviously, until late in December. So it's incredibly difficult for us to then obviously plan and determine where we're at with our budget. And I appreciate that's not ideal for schools. But as much as we can give them, and every school should have by now, I believe, have had an indicative budget, which, Yeah, I'm seeing nodding over there. So I know David was working incredibly hard so that every school could have an indicative budget, which hopefully will be around the figure, or perhaps the figure may improve slightly, because I think it went out at 6%, the indicative budget, and you'll see from today, the proposal now is that hopefully it will be a 5.5% reduction to schools. And obviously we've worked with schools for months to look at the beginning, which obviously was a very high figure, to look at a range of between 10% and 5%. Now, we said to prepare for the worst, but hope that things wouldn't be quite so bad. And thankfully, we're in a position now where, due to a great deal of hard work, we're in a better position. So it's difficult because I can't say to schools, absolutely 100%, your figure is going to be X, when it will be another 2 weeks before we democratically decide as a council what that's going to be. But I take your point. Moving forward, we can attempt to give schools, and we did try that, a medium-term plan with 3 years, but obviously then the budgets that we've received are so very different to what we were expecting that it's hard to be precise. But yeah, we'll continue to do everything we can. We already have redundancy panels going ahead. We have a number of schools who are already taking part in that. I sit on the redundancy panel. There are a number of schools who are still considering voluntary redundancies, and they will continue to receive the support from HR, from Education Services, and from Finance to approach that in the appropriate way. But thank you for your question.
Thanks. Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we've now got a more thorough understanding of the process. So thank you to both of you. We now move on to item 6, to consider a call-in of Cabinet decision of the 23rd of January 2024, local government budget 24-25, pages 12 to 14. This Cabinet decision of 23rd of January was called in because it is a significant deviation from the Finance and Resources Scrutiny Committee decision. Scrutiny recommended that the business cases be supported. Cabinet clearly misunderstood this, and the following day, Cabinet resolved that only unavoidable business cases be supported in order that the shortfall be reduced by 1.977 million. I'm pleased to say that there are now revised proposals around the business cases within the revenue budget presented today. So on that basis, we are content to withdraw our call-in. It's clear that in light of this call-in and the resident survey, Cabinet and the Coalition have had to rethink their cuts to education and social care and revise their proposed rise to residents' council tax. Hopefully, they will now rethink some of their capital business cases and further reduce the council tax burden on the people of Conway. There was not even a Cabinet debate on the risks around not approving forced social workers for deprivation of liberty safeguards, which would have exposed Conway and its people to massive risks. On this basis, we withdraw our call-in. Thank you, members.
Well, that's been withdrawn, so it's no longer before the committee for debate.
Thank you very much. Okay, members. Now, Councillor Paul wishes to, if you'd like to repeat. That we're not debating that.
Unless you're minded to bring them in, what's the next page?
Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to apologise to the committee because I was the councillor that caused the confusion. Usually colleagues or officers rescue me from any missteps or mistakes I make. And my intention was definitely not to cause any confusion. And I was very clear in my own mind. And if you followed the debate up to the point that I made the proposal, I was very clear that it was the unavoidable business cases that I was proposing to support. The fact that I mistook, I apologise to the committee and any confusion caused.
Thank you very much, Councillor Paul. Well, the members presumed that you had supported all the business cases because, of course, in terms of the dolls, I don't know how many of you have read the paperwork behind what that actually does in terms of the risk it exposes vulnerable residents and Conway as corporate parents and as everything else. So that would have been a vital part of the debate. But thank you.
And Chair,
support.
if you know, right from being elected, I have probably been the most vocal
You have.
councillor about the doles, and I'm sure Tesney will confirm that, because it was a significant concern to me, and that's why the process happened. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Yes, and that is why we know how much you've put into dolls, and we know that that's why we thought that you had put that, because that was down as risk, as a risk case. So thank you. No, we'll move on. Yes, okay. Thank you, Councillor Paul. Okay, we now move on to item 7A, revenue budget 23-24, Q3 monitoring report, pages 15 to 27. Councillor Charlie's going to introduce, and Amanda Hughes, our Strategic Director, Finance and Resources, will present the report.
Diolch Cadera the Barda, Pawb. Yeah, I'll be fairly brief in introducing this and I'll let Amanda go through the actual detail. I guess the headline figure is in 1.2, that from the second quarter to the third quarter, the overspend is reduced from 3.831 million to 1.707 million. Obviously, members have expressed concern about the impact of a sort of pause and review in terms of spend. So you'll note in 3.1 that Amanda has added an extra column, which actually shows where the spend has changed between the last quarter and this quarter. You will note as well, 3.2, that service pressures continue: home to school transport, social care, children looked after, and housing. Home to school transport, we're doing a consultation on the non-essential item of that, because clearly that budget is a concern in terms of our overall affordability. Social care is a statutory duty, as is housing, and we're still seeing significant pressure on those areas. So I suppose I want to reassure members that where essential services are required, we will still be prioritising them. 3.3 sets out some of the good news in terms of where we've been able to bring some of that spend down. Clearly, we all know our situation as regards our reserves is critical. They were the lowest when I joined this council in 2017. And that's put us in a really difficult situation in terms of meeting fluctuations. So I will let Amanda take you through the detail of the report. I think essentially it is good news. I think it shows our commitment to drive costs down where we can, or drive spend down where we can, but by focusing our money on the most vulnerable in society and fulfilling our statutory duties. So thank you, Chair.
You, Chair. Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, so just to take you through this in a little bit more detail, although I won't obviously appreciate you've read the report, so I won't talk too much. But just to draw your attention in the first instance to the change in the format of Appendix 1, and effectively, I think it had been in my mind for a while that the could at times be a little bit confusing, and I think certainly at the last committee, Councillor Anne also drew attention to that. So I've changed the format of the report to make it much more explicitly clear. So effectively, columns 1 to 5 now in Appendix 1, which is on page 23, effectively show the original budget with any environments, to then move to column 3, which is the revised budget, the actual projected outturn, and therefore the actual over or underspend potentially in column 5. Column 6, 7, and 8 effectively look at what was the projected overspend last time as compared to this time, and therefore the movement between the two periods in that second half. So the previous report used to just show what's in column 6, 7, and 8. So I've as I say, I've introduced the other information to make the actual position much more clear. So hopefully you'll find that useful going forward. Just then in terms of the actual situation then. So as Charlie's indicated, we're now following the detailed work on the third quarter outturn. We're now projecting an over budget effectively of 1.7 million. I would reflect that I am aware that pressure is still increasing with regard to children looked after, and therefore that may well worsen a little bit from where we are now because of that pressure. But obviously equally, I'm aware that that service and all services are continuing to obviously seek to contain spend as best they can by the year end. So we'll see what happens. It is an improved position, predominantly as a result of changes in some of the corporate budgets. So interest rates. Not that interest rates have changed. I appreciate interest rates have stayed the same, but at the point the forecast was done, there'd been an anticipation of some further uplift that obviously hasn't happened, thankfully, and therefore the projection is now brought back down in line with our current borrowing. We also are managing to collect council tax consistently as we have in previous years, which is obviously very positive, and therefore we anticipate that the collection against the budget will be slightly higher, which is again positive, and the significant change which helps our in-year position but also our budget position for next year is a change on energy costs. You'll recall that we're obviously expecting a significant uplift in our energy costs in the year, and in fact in setting the 23-24 budget, the council had to add £5 million into the budget to address that pressure. At an earlier point in the year, when obviously we hadn't had much of our actual activity through, where there was a risk, or we thought that it was going to be overspent a bit further than that by 0.6 million. Obviously, by now we've had 3/4 of the year's bills. We're much more able to therefore forecast what the outturn is going to be, and in actual fact, we now think potentially the budget's going to be underspent by about £500,000. So that between it, therefore, has swung the overspend position by £1 million, which is obviously all to the good. Services, as I say, continue to address and seek to contain spend as best as possible, and that will continue to the end of the year. As an example of that, we have put in a very robust and rigorous process around vacancy control to try and ensure that we only are recruiting posts that are absolutely essential, and trying to drag where we can, etc. So there's a range of activity ongoing, and as I say, that will continue until the year end. One risk I want to, however, draw your attention to is at the moment the forecast includes an expectation of spend by us as a council of 564,000 in relation to costs following Storm Babet. Our actual spend in relation to that storm and the cleanup costs will be in the region of about 1.4 million. We have notified Welsh Government that we will be seeking support through their emergency financial assistance scheme. We have a threshold to pay, which is what the 564,000 is. But I'm assuming within this forecast that we will get the remaining 800 and odd thousand back from Welsh Government through the emergency financial assistance scheme. Unfortunately, we've not yet had confirmation that the scheme is going to be opened. We're not the only authority seeking assistance through that scheme, and I'm sure Charlie can update. We're obviously doing a significant amount of communication with Welsh Government, stressing the importance and need for them to open that scheme so that we're not left with that unforeseen cost. But at this point in time, it obviously serves to be a risk. I have, as reported previously, Appendix 2 contains details of the in-year budget reductions that were approved and set as part of the budget in the current financial year. As Pardon me, as shown last time, we anticipate by the end of the year that around 10 million of those budget reductions have been will have been implemented, a shortfall of about 1.3 million. The services that haven't achieved those are making alternative efforts to find alternative savings to that. But just to give assurance on the amount that hasn't been achieved, it is in train to be achieved. The previous report detailed it in particular, but it was to do with housing and also office closures, etc. So I think they will potentially will be achieved in time, but I guess the lead-in time was a little bit longer than had been anticipated when they were put into the current year's budget. Our balances continue to obviously be under pressure, and to the extent that we do have an overspend at the end of the year, if that turns out to be the case, to whatever extent it's a pressure, it's above nil effectively, then that will fall on our balances and obviously erode the surety of that position, which is obviously why every attempt to contain that is being taken. So other than that, I guess I just want members to note the position and note the continued efforts to contain the spend position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Okay, members, questions, please. Councillor Gareth.
Just a question around the storm scheme, which seems to be taking a significant amount of time to actually be resolved. But just wondered whether, when we put a claim in for storm damage, is it a little bit like insurance? Is there some quantifiable look at the maintenance when we're setting the budgets of, is it cut back if we haven't actually maintained gullies, or if we haven't actually cleared streams and things like that? Are we at risk of it being turned down if we haven't done everything, the day-to-day housekeeping stuff that we need to do throughout the year? Thank you.
No, I'm not aware of any consideration wider than the claim itself. I've certainly, I haven't been part of a process historically in terms of making a claim, but certainly in terms of the terms and conditions that are set, there's no reference in any way, shape or form to any of that. Having said that, the one area that is worth just mentioning is that the scheme is only available for revenue spend. It's not available for capital spend, and so I think there is a little bit of a grey area around the fact that some of the damage sort of spills over in that grey area between what could be classed as revenue and what could be classed as capital. But at the end of the day, to respond to the incident, there's a need, to do certain work that might, as I say, spill into capital. So there's a debate. There may well be a debate around certain aspects of our claim, but I think the more fundamental issue we have at the moment is that we haven't had confirmation that they're going to open the scheme. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. I bet you never thought you'd have to be an expert on gully maintenance once you joined Conway. So I don't know if Councillor Gromway wanted to comment on that at all in light of the what was said in Frosk on I think it was the 3rd or 4th of December about the cutbacks that we're having to make in ERF. No. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. We now move on to, we've got Councillor Harry, then Councillor Charlie. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've just got 2 questions. Hopefully they're really straightforward. The first one, I just want to come to Appendix 1. I think this is probably for Amanda or possibly Charlie, whoever's best placed to field this question. And we've obviously got this column 3, revised budget for the current financial year. So am I right in thinking this is the revised budget following the pause and slow instruction that went out to services?
No, it's the revised budget after environments effectively. So just to explain, the bulk of the adjustments in that environments column are reflective of the disaggregation of in setting the current year's budget in 23-24. One of the budget reductions that was made in setting that budget was we assumed a 1% recruitment drag across all service budgets, excluding schools. And when the budget was first set, that recruitment drag was put into other corporate expenditure. So on page 23, sort of roughly halfway, you can see other corporate expenditure, and you can see in that column there's 892,000, and effectively that was all put in that budget, and then at a point in the year it's been disaggregated across all the individual services. So column 2 just reflects movements in the budget from the original budget. So effectively the two budgets are identical bar those changes. So yeah, that therefore is the full budget. Not so the budget, no budget adjustment was made in the context of an ask about pause and slow. That was around just trying to spend less effectively against the existing budget.
Okay, thanks for that. I think off the back of that, I'd probably restate the point I've made previously around this pause and slow. It clearly has been necessary. It's good to see, by the way, that clearly the financial position for the council has improved during this year. No doubt that pause and slow was necessary, but it'd be useful to actually know what the impact of those instructions have been. I know Councillor Gronwy Edwards has shared what those are in respect of his portfolio, but I'm unsure on what they are in terms of other portfolios. It would be useful if that could be shared with members at some point. So I suppose that's a plea that information is shared with us. The next point I just wanted to pick up, there's obviously reference in paragraph 3.3 of the report to a change in energy costs, which obviously that's really positive to see. But I wondered at what point did we become aware of that change?
Oh, sorry, my apologies, Harry. In terms of that, effectively when we've done the third quarter outturn, we've undertaken a detailed consideration based on obviously our actual position at the third quarter. So it's very, very recent, both in terms of this report and obviously its impact on the budget report for next year as well. It's just literally been in the last 2 weeks effectively.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker, Councillor Charlie. Someone's ringing.
Thank you, Chair. Just on 2 points. In terms of the Storm Babbitt Fund, I gave evidence in the Senate Committee in Cardiff. I raised the issue then. Subsequently in North Wales and WLGA, I've raised it with various Senate members, and I've spoken to Chris Llewellyn from the WLGA about pushing that point. But it does showcase in some ways how we are dependent on some of this funding. You know, we get our settlement, but there are various elements of grants and stuff that we would normally expect to get. We have submitted a claim, but the fund isn't open, which I think really is unacceptable, because we clearly need to plan ahead and be able to protect our residents. In terms of the second issue, Harry, you will be aware that our SPR, service performance reviews, are held twice a year. Something we changed from previous years is there is a budgetary discussion in there. So there's a line in there about how they're meeting the £11 million cuts we had to bring forward last year, but also about how pause and slow affects their services. And it is an opportunity for members to address officers, face to face in a very informal environment about the effect of these changes on their services. And as always, I would really encourage members where they can to attend those, because you are given that opportunity to have that conversation in a really detailed way, and I would suggest in a better way than a simple report could do. But I do take your point about needing to be updated on that. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Charlie. Yes, the SPRs are very informative, aren't they, to put it mildly? Yes, thank you. I can't see any more speakers on this. I've got one quick question for Councillor Arron around the 3.2. What effect has the turmoil surrounding the housing support grant had on the homeless budget, as per the audit report mentioned by Councillor Paul? Yes, sure. What effect has the turmoil surrounding the HSG had on our homelessness budget? The audit report highlighted by Councillor Paul in audit on last Monday. So thank you.
I must admit, I'm not cited on that. I'm looking across to Ewan. He's a bit worried I'm giving him a hospital pass here.
I
So,
think you're wrong, man, but I think you are.
are you able to answer that, Ewan?
Well, excuse me, sorry, I need to ask you to repeat the question again.
Yes, sure. It's the audit report on the HSG, the Housing Support Grant. Clearly, there's been turmoil in the service and a loss of grip and control, and I'm really concerned how that's impacted on our homeless budget. So, oh, yay, here's Peter as well. I didn't see you come in there, Peter. Good morning.
I don't think it's had any effect on the homelessness budget. The reforms that we're putting in place at the moment and the review that we're doing will have a positive effect on the budget because we're targeting a lot of that grant to services that are currently covered by core grant. So we're reviewing all that in accordance with the new guidance. So currently it hasn't had any direct effect on the homelessness budget.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Peter. Lovely. Okay, members, no more questions, no one online. Councillor Paul, you've disappointed me for the first time. No questions from you. You're having a quiet morning. Okay, right, well, the recommendations are that Finance and Resources scrutinise. Oh, yay, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I hope I'm not sort of cutting across you because, in fact, I really don't have any questions. I think the ones that I have been answered already. I would like to thank Amanda for the change in format of Appendix 1. I think it's really helpful. So thanks for the response to sort of the feedback. I think I'd really just like to move to recommendations, which is where I think you were going, Chair. But before I do that, I would just like to remind us and ask us to go back to 1.3, because 1.3, the very bottom sentence there, just to remind us, it says it's essential that every effort continues to be made between now and the financial year end to further improve the position. And very much, why I do that is I think it's really important that we don't take our foot off the gas, because in terms of that overspend of 1.7 million, it's really important that we actually still continue to try and minimise it. So my recommendations are, one, that we note the year-to-date overspend of 1.7 million, the majority of which is recurring. And secondly, that we provide a strong steer to Cabinet to leave no stone unturned to eliminate this recurring overspend. And the reasons for that is failing to eliminate it would impact on our dangerously low reserves and cause us to be in breach of our own policy around reserves. And that would be an invidious position for ourselves to be in. So two recommendations there, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anne, for those two. Have we a seconder for that from, Councillor Gareth would like to second. Okay, members, so we'll take that one. Matt?
Yeah, so essentially it's to receive and note the latest financial assessment and also strong steer to Cabinet to eliminate recurring overspend. I think the rest was narrative, wasn't it, about what the impact of that would be? So that I think that's the recommendation.
Does that sum it up, Councillor Anne?
Yeah, it does, but I would just, reinforce the point that we need to protect our dangerously low reserves. And although Matt's taken that out of the recommendation, I think it actually is really important addendum to it. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so we'll put that back in then. Protect the dangerously low reserves.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had a proposal, we've had a second. Would members like to show on that recommendation, please? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the room. That's and online. 1, 2, 3 online. Yeah, Councillor Chris, no, that's not a hand, right. So 8 in the room and 3 online. Those against? Those abstaining? One abstention. Okay, so that is carried, members. Thank you very much for that. We now move on to item 7B, revised capital programme 23-24, Q3 monitoring report, pages 28 to 44. And again, we go to Amanda Hughes, our strategic director, and Councillor Charlie, the leader, will introduce the report.
Thank you once again, Chair. Again, thanks to Amanda for a very clear report. Clearly, capital spend has interest and revenue costs for us in the long term, but we have to balance out the need to do essential projects, the need to access grant funding to the benefit of our residents in making these decisions. It's clear that over 50% is grant funded. The other stuff, the major cost is our coastal defences, which are absolutely essential. We have the longest stretch of artificially defended coast in the UK, which does come at a substantial cost. And clearly we're all aware that within that industry, costs are rising, continue to rise way in advance of the inflation rates. So it's that balance that we have to hit at all times, isn't it? Where we do essential works and we try and attract grant funding, but mindful of the revenue costs that will be there for many years to come. So I'll hand over to Amanda at that stage.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, so this effectively is just an update report in terms of our third quarter capital spend. You'll be aware following the second quarter, some amendments were made and some items were taken out of the capital programme. So they've been reflected in here. There's been, as there always is, a little bit of movement between the second and third quarter in the context of grants that have been received and add to the programme and or sort of amendments to previous figures or understanding as time moves by. So the detail of the changes are in Appendix 1. And total 6 million. So effectively, the report is looking for the approval of that increase to the capital programme. It also reports the actual spend to date, which, as at the end of December, was £27 million. So to the extent you can see that the capital programme in total is some 123 million. You know, we a lot of it is still to be spent and was always in effect timetable to be spent over a number of years because of the nature of some of these schemes, particularly the Crump schemes, which are programmes that obviously take more than 1 year to bring to fruition. So as such, that's all I really want to say about the report, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Okay, members, let's open it up for questions. Councillor Harry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to take us to the appendix. I think it's Appendix 1 with the new schemes, and there's a couple here. Ysgol Gogarth development and Ysgol Craven development, where it's got here that, and tell me if I'm reading the spreadsheet wrong, numbers aren't always my strong suit, but minus 340,000 and minus 135,000 respectively, and it says reserve repaid to school. So why has that happened? Is it the development isn't going ahead, or it has gone ahead and there's funds left over that can be repaid to a school? I'd just appreciate knowing what's brought those couple of changes about.
I might have to call my colleague in to give the specific details, but certainly my understanding is that there were schemes that those schools were taking forward. I don't know the detail of them, and that's hopefully what my colleague will be able to tell you, that they were planning they've now changed their mind. They were funding it from their reserves. They've now changed their mind, and so hence it's dropping out of the programme, and they're retaining their reserves. Hugh, do you know what the actual specific schemes were?
I haven't got great detail, but it's basically they've given us the money to spend on their schools into a capital reserve. But either the scheme has been smaller or hasn't gone ahead. And so that's been obviously decided in democracy somehow. And so it's only fair then that the school gets the money back because it's not going to be used for that purpose anymore. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Harry. Any more questions? Anyone? Councillor Mandy? No. No. Okay, well, if we've got no more, questions, could we have a recommendation then, please, members? Well, tumbleweed blowing across the chamber. No one's making a recommendation. What happens then? Oh, Councillor Paul, good morning.
Can we thank and note the report?
Oh, and Councillor Chris, thank you, Councillor Paul. Was that a proposal? Councillor Chris.
I was just seconding Councillor Paul's proposal, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, there are some recommendations there to improve a net increase of 6.004 million to the total capital programme, and also to note the total capital programme of 122.67 million in the third quarter capital outturn position for 23-24. Is it just to note the report, or is can I just clarify?
Thank you for rescuing me, Matt.
Yes, they are, but it's just in terms of whether or not Frosk actually wants to support those recommendations or not, Chair, for clarity.
I do want to support those recommendations, Matt. Thank you for rescuing me.
And is there a seconder to that, Chair? Chris Hughes.
Chris, okay. Not all superheroes wear capes, Matt. So you say Councillor Paul again. Okay, well, we've had a proposal, we've had a seconder. Could members show, please? Eight in the room. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5 online. Thank you. Anyone against? Any abstentions? No, that's carried. Councillor Stephen, you took the comfort break at the wrong point. Okay, we now move on to item 7C, draft revenue budget and council tax increase 24-25, pages 45 to 109. Councillor Charlie's going to introduce, and then Amanda is going to present. So thank you, Councillor Charlie.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware this has been an incredibly difficult year on the back of several other very difficult years. I'd like to start by thanking my predecessor, Mike Priestley, for the work he did at the start of the year before he had to sadly step down for the role. This report is an excellent report in terms of it clearly sets out the situation as to where we are and what our options are to fulfil our legal duty of preparing a balanced budget. I'd like to thank Amanda for the really cooperative way she works with me and other cabinet members in terms of setting out what the decision-making process is and how we've arrived here. I'd like to thank her and all the SLT and senior management team and all our staff for the collaborative way they've worked to try and find a solution to the issues that we face. If you move to my comments, we've lost £82 million from our budget in the last 11 years. If you think that our entire aggregate external funding, which makes up 72% of our funding, is in the region of 200 million, that is a huge, huge amount of money. Our ability to carry on delivering services to our residents in face of cuts of that level is incredibly difficult. So it doesn't get any easier, but we have a balanced budget here. In terms of the democratic trail, members, which is detailed for you on page 3.1. It was my aim to make sure that members had as much engagement, transparency and understanding of our budget as they could possibly when we look to make a decision on the 29th of February. So we held 6 budget working groups throughout the year. The first one was as way back as the 5th of May last year. The agenda there was about lessons learned from the budget setting process last year. We were asking members to tell us what sort of information they needed in terms of meetings and different agenda, and whether they needed any other training to help them understand the budgetary situation. On the 20th of June, we held a social care meeting. At every single one of these meetings, there's a budgetary update given to members about where the financial situation was throughout the year as it evolved. On the 18th of July, there was a meeting on education. The 5th of September, we dealt with environment, roads and facilities. On the 3rd of October, it was economy, culture, regulatory, housing, finance, audit, legal, performance and IT. On the 21st of November, last meeting, we, as Julie said, we met the school head teachers to get a better understanding of the challenges that they faced. Some members' attendance at those meetings was absolutely excellent. They are recorded online. The attendance is there and the minutes are there. For some members, the attendance wasn't so good, which is a shame really, because that is an opportunity to understand this council well. It's an opportunity to understand the services we provide. And frankly, it's an opportunity to suggest where cuts could be made. So I again, would like to thank the people who were there, because that was a really valuable, important way to do it. I've already referred to our service performance reviews, which are held twice a year. And again, you've got an opportunity for officers to tell you what they do, explain what the challenges are, and go over their budget and the effects it has on them. So again, I would encourage members to engage in those as much as possible. In terms of our provisional settlement, we know that Conwy received the lowest settlement in Wales. I've been very vocal about the funding formula, which essentially does nothing to recognise the rising costs of looking after an elderly population, which is particularly significant in Conwy, as 27% of our residents over 65. We receive 15% less per head than our neighbours in Denbighshire, and we receive 10% less per head than our neighbours in Gwynedd. That's year on year, around £20 million compared to Denbighshire. I've been a member of this council since 2017. So you're looking at 120 and £140 million difference, which, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, would have put us in a very different situation. We initially received 2% increase, which was subsequently updated to 2.26 as a result of the consequential from the extra £25 million of funding. So we've received a total of £4.6 million. To give out a bit of context, our neighbours in Denbighshire this year alone will receive an additional £3.5 million. £3.5 million accounts to a 5% increase in council tax. So I hope it gives that some scale as to the challenge that we face compared to some of our immediate neighbours. 5.1 table 2 sets out the reasons for these pressures, and largely it's down to circumstances out of our control. We have pay pressures for teaching staff, schools and non-schools, which £4.3 million. Remind members that teachers and salaries are set by Welsh Government. Pay pressures from our own local government staff is £7.625 million. We have pay pressures for elected members of £100,000. Now, again, our wages are set independently by an independent review body. We do not vote on that. Clearly, it's up to members to decide what they do with that. But again, I would point out that in terms of our overall budget, it's about 0.59% of everything we spend. So even getting rid of all of us wouldn't make any real significant difference to the situation that we're in. There are other costs there in terms of borrowing and interest rates. Again, those are out of our control. There's the North Wales Fire and Rescue Authority and various other bits. The business cases is interesting because the vast majority of those are actually pay driven. We know we've had to pay the real living wage to domiciliary care workers in our care homes. So there's probably around £7-8 million there of pressures, which is directly related to increases in pay. So of all that, you're probably looking at about 20 odd million pounds, 21, 22 million pounds, which is directly related to pay that we actually don't set ourselves. So, you know, that again sets out the scale of the challenges. A council tax increase of 10% is around 6 million. We've received 4.6 million, 10.5 million. That doesn't even meet half the wage bill that we have to meet in this current year. So, you know, it really is an unprecedented situation. Addressing that, essentially, we will list the sort of cuts that we're proposing and how we've looked to balance that out. I will let Amanda go through the sort of more detailed bits of that. Cheryl was right that we were able to make some changes. That was following the announcement that we'd received an additional £526,000. It's not a huge amount of money, but what we've tried to do is spread that as far as we can and try and recognise the pressures in line with the consultation with our residents. So if you look at 6.4, we're proposing that the budget reduction for schools is reduced from 6% to 5.5. That means we're putting an additional £378,000 into schools. It's worth noting that of the additional funding we received, that's actually 70% of that funding that we're putting directly into schools to alleviate their pressures. I'm a governor in 2 schools. I was a parent governor before I joined the council. Ironically, it was budget concerns at the school was one of the drivers for me to join the council back in 2017. But there you go. But I think we can clearly demonstrate, as was evidenced in the excellent Eston report we have, that where we can, we've always looked to protect our schools because we know the pressure they're under, and we know that our young people are our future. Table 4, again, there's a huge amount of interest in school. Table 4 is very interesting. It actually spells out where the money is going to schools, pensions, pay, etc. What we're proposing, actually, the net increase to schools will be 3.873 million, which is actually in cash terms an increase of 5%. I recognise that's not what schools asked for. I recognise there'll be real pressures for our schools actually to manage on that reduced budget. But again, you know, we have to live in our means, and we've clearly shown that we are committed to our schools, and we'll continue to do that wherever we can. I will clearly there'll be a lot of questions about that, clearly a lot of questions about our council tax levels, but I think at this stage it would be better if Amanda walks us through the report, and then I'll take questions afterwards, Chair. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Charlie. Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, I'll take through the report in a reasonable amount of detail, if that's okay. So apologies if I go into more detail than you want, but I hope you'll indulge me in that sense. So I guess in particular, what I want to focus on is obviously where things have changed from the previous report. So I don't want to sort of in a way just repeat what you've heard previously, and as I say, focus on those differences. So just in the first instance, then I set out in table 1 the situation in terms of the AAF. Charlie's already talked through some of the detail of that, but effectively since the last report, we have obviously heard of the additional announcement that was announced on the 7th of February by Welsh Government, which was a confirmation that the 25 million consequential to a UK announcement around 600 million extra being put into local government is being passed on fully to local government in Wales. The Welsh Government are choosing to give that back to Wales in a couple of ways. One, by reinstating a social care workforce grant that they had previously reduced, and the remaining amount of money is going into the settlement itself and being redistributed in line with that. Although the letter and information is in the appendices, we haven't Welsh Government haven't yet published new tables, but we have unofficially, or officially but unofficially, been given an indication that our additional settlement will be £526,000, but it is still subject to Welsh Government quality checks, and there is, I guess, a chance that it might change slightly when the final settlement comes. In a positive vein, I was a little bit worried in the context of the announcement that Welsh Government might have removed the floor, and that therefore would have not helped us particularly. Thankfully, they chose not to do that. So the original floor arrangement, which we and Gwynedd benefited from, was retained, and we'll get as I say, an additional allocation as well. So table 1 therefore sets out the expectation in terms of AEF. Just in terms of some of the appendices, I've included in the appendices the draft settlement by local authority and also the draft settlement, the settlement in the context of per capita levels. Those two bits of information are still based on the original provisional settlement because effectively, as I say, Welsh Government have yet to issue the revised tables following their quality checks. So apologies in that sense that that's not reflecting the additional money, but it's because that's not yet available to us. And obviously, if it is available to us by the time we go to council, then that can be updated. So moving on then, I want to just explain some of the changes that have happened since the last report. So table 2 sets out effectively the figures as were in the last report, which showed that we had a shortfall after the original draft settlement of 25.375 million. In table 3, I've reflected the changes that have occurred since that time. So we've effectively had some further confirmation about some specifics around the North Wales Fire Levy, the Coroner's Levy. We have also adjusted a handful of lines following the third quarter outturn. So that's allowed us to reduce a handful of corporate budgets in line with the projected outturn for this year. Also, that energy issue has played very positively into the position. So we've been able to, on the back of the third quarter outturn forecast for energy, the business case that had been submitted for an extra 650 has been able to be withdrawn and actually will be adjusting down the underlying budget by 492,000 as well. There's been some revision following a revisit to the costings around Ysgol Gogarth because of the pupil numbers and the complexity of that arrangement. So that's increased a business case. And in particular, I have reconsidered the assumptions around pay and I've reduced the pay forecast for NJC staff. So just to explain what I've done there. So I'd previously worked on an assumption that all NJC staff would receive £1,625 as an uplift on their pay scale, and that worked out at an average for us as an authority at around 6%. In light of information that I had from across Wales in terms of what assumptions are being used across all the other council budgets in Wales. I was an outlier in putting 6% in. Most of the other authorities actually had a range of between 3.5% to 5%. So with that in mind, I revisited the modelling that I'd done before, and I have remodeled the pay and what I've modeled it on. So by chance it actually comes to 5%, but I want to just stress that I've been a bit more sophisticated than just saying, well, I'll do 5% because that's what other treasurers have done. I've modelled effectively what will happen if the national living wage, which ultimately is the driver for the uplift in NJC pay, that if the national living wage increases by 6.5%, and if the headroom between the national living wage and the minimum NJC point is maintained, then that would lead to an uplift in the pay scale of 1430 rather than 1625. And so on that basis, I've revised it down to 5%. Now, I appreciate and more than appreciate, I will stress to you that obviously builds an element of risk into the budget. Because if I'm wrong and it was it was folly to reduce it, then obviously that will need to be found in the following year, and obviously in all likelihood would have to fall on balances. But ultimately it's a balance, isn't it, between making a prudent reserve, a prudent assumption and a prudent provision for pay, which I believe it is, with actually being too prudent, and therefore resulting in the council needing to either implement more cuts, or which would impact on services, or have a higher council tax, which would obviously impact more negatively again on residents. So it is a balancing act. It does have risk associated with it, and Councillor Paul has kindly sent me some information around the current forecast for pay, which would suggest pay is still running quite high, and it is there for a balance to take. So I want to, apologies for going through that in detail. I don't want you to think that there isn't risk associated with it. There is, but at the same time, I believe, in light of the work that I've done, I believe that hopefully it is a reasonable assumption and a prudent provision for pay. Time will tell whether I'm proved wrong, I guess. In terms of the other pay award, which was Teachers' Pay Award, which was I'd had modelled at 5%, I have left that because I think again, it probably does feel reasonable that might be the award going. So I've left that unchanged. I would also just, while we're talking about pay, still draw your attention, and I appreciate you are aware of this already, but I do want to just stress it again because of the risk that it poses. I am assuming in the figures presented to you that we will receive 2 million in grant funding towards the increased cost for the employers' contributions to the Teachers' Pension Fund following the 2020 revaluation. I can confirm, when this happened last time, there was a revaluation, I think it affected the 1920 budget, I think. Central money was provided for that, and there's obviously an expectation that will flow again this year. And I can also confirm that I've seen correspondence from the Welsh Local Government Association to the Treasury, reminding them of their obligations in that respect. And no doubt Welsh Government are also reminding them of their responsibilities. So, but at this moment, it's not been confirmed, and therefore there is a risk associated with that. So following those changes, as set out in Table 3, it brings our proposed shortfall down from 25,375 to 22,508. So moving on, therefore, to how that is addressed and how those bits of the jigsaw sort of lead to a balanced budget. Turning firstly to the business cases. So again, you'll have seen, you saw all the business cases last time in the report, but there are a handful of changes following the last time, and they're detailed in Appendix 6. There's a little table at the bottom which just provides a little bit of a summary. So effectively, as I've already outlined, the energy business case falls out. There was an amendment of a typo, essentially, of 40,000 on one of the business cases. The Ysgol Gogarth business case has been increased, and the other change is that the deprivation of liberties safeguarding business case has been reclassified, or half of it has been reclassified as being essential, because as has already been touched on earlier on, it is a risk that the council is carrying in relation to that, and actually on reflection, it was felt that something had to be, part of that business case had to be met, and therefore it was reclassified as essential. So with those changes in mind, so effectively the total value of the business cases in total reduced by 340 thousand from 14,858 to 14,518. And then, as I say, there was that reclassification of half of the DOS. So that what that meant effectively was that those categorised as unavoidable are now 12.721 million. Obviously, at its last meeting, Cabinet recommended that those categorised as essential were supported in full, and therefore this proposal confirms that also, but with that revised figure. So effectively, this will see the business cases not classed as essential not being supported, and that equals 1.797 million. Also, just to confirm the recommendation from last time as well, which was that there were some one-off elements in two business cases totaling 407,000, and that would be funded from reserve. So the proposals in relation to business cases are summarised there in paragraph 6.8 and 6.9. So as I say, all essential business cases funded, 12,721, one-off elements, 407 from reserves. And then for clarity, it means that the business cases classed as addressing risk replacement of grant or other fall out and are not funded, which total 1.797 million. Moving on then to the budget reductions. All the budget reductions were presented last time. So if I talk separately about the budget reductions from services as opposed to the budget reduction from schools. So just touching on the budget reductions from services in the first instance, members of FROSC saw last time proposals around budget reductions that total 7.778 million. Since then, we've identified a small number of other budget proposals equaling 341,000, and they are detailed in Appendix 7 for your information, which add to the pack from last time. So the budget reductions on the table for services are 8.119 million. These proposals effectively have made effectively Cabinet, in light of the commentary here at FROSC last time and their own considerations, are now effectively saying that two of those budget reduction proposals from last time will not go ahead. So what they are or rather not go ahead in part for one and in total for the other. So one was the nappy collection. There was a budget reduction proposal of £80,000, which was a reconfiguration of the nappy collection routes and processes and timings. In light of, as I say, the discussion last time, that's proposal is that actually isn't taken forward as a budget reduction. And the other one was in relation to telecare, where there was a proposed increase. Whilst there will still be an increase in this proposal, the increase is going to be reduced, and therefore that business case has been reduced. That budget reduction proposal has been reduced down by 188,000. I would stress here that even with the proposed increase, the income recovered for telecare does not cover the cost of delivering that service, and therefore it is still a subsidised service. So I make that point just because I think there's been some misconception around us making profits in relation to that. That's absolutely not the case. It is still a subsidised service, even with the proposed increase in this budget. So that was the situation with regard to the services budget reductions. Moving on to schools, as Councillor Julie's already set out earlier on, Cabinet's recommendation last time was that the schools budget would be reduced by 6%. Noting that that's calculated based on the opening budget position, so it is actually a little bit less than that in reality, but 6%. Following the changes, following the additional money that's come through from Welsh Government, the 526,000, Cabinet recommended, or Cabinet hopefully will be recommending tomorrow, the proposal here is that 0.5% comes off the school budget reduction, and that's effectively gives a 378,000 reduction back to schools effectively. So it's brought down from a proposal of 4.539 to a proposal of 4.161 million into the schools budgets. So effectively then with those proposals, what the proposed budget reductions therefore are for £12.012 million to come forward as reductions as part of the recommended budget, split in 6.15 between service budgets of 7.851 and schools budgets of 4.161. I won't touch on the impact of schools because Councillor Charlie's already referenced that. So moving then to the section in the report that I've referenced, budget amendments. So one of the things that we'd reflected in the previous report was effectively the full cost of the capital financing costs, the borrowing costs associated with the capital programme, both in terms of the existing capital programme and in terms of the proposed capital programme for 24-25. Now, historically, the council hasn't built these costs into its budget at the time it's made those commitments to the capital programme. Instead, it's built the commitment into the budget as that has fallen due, and as you'll be aware from many reports previously, the obligations for the repayment of debt follow after the capital spend. So effectively, the capital debt is made up of two elements. There is what's called the minimum revenue provision, and there's interest. So what the minimum revenue provision is effectively the repayment of the debt, the repayment of the principal, and that only starts to get repaid the year following the completion of the capital scheme. So if you spend the money in 23-24, then the borrowing cost doesn't start to impact on revenue until 24-25. So we know, don't we, from the previous report that of the capital programme in 23-24, I think the report I was reflecting the expenditure at the third quarter was 27 million against a budget of 130 million. Obviously, by the end of the year, it will be higher, but what I built into the 24-25 programme was the full cost of all of that in 24-25, even though we know that actually some of it won't come through till 25-26 or even 26-27. So therefore, what I had been recommending and was recommended in the previous report was that in the window of time when we didn't actually need the cash, because we had the commitment, but the cash wasn't needed in year one, we would seek to replenish our balances in that interim window. And obviously, we have discussed before about the need to replenish our balances, and that might have been a mechanism to do it. And it's certainly something I think we need to consider in the future. But I think at this stage, and given the scale of the budgetary challenges, I've reconsidered that, and we've discussed it as a senior leadership team, and also obviously with Charlie as portfolio holder, and on reflection, therefore, I'm proposing this budget as it were proposes that we revise that those figures and actually take out elements that we know will not fall due in 24-25, and therefore it's intended to reduce the costs that were being built into the budget of 2.792 million for the existing 23-24 programme. It's proposed that we reduce that by 654,000 because of that lag, and we won't incur interest on borrowing because we won't have spent it yet, and therefore to take that out because, as I say, we don't need that cash. With that particular element, I don't anticipate that will cause a future budget pressure. And the reason I don't anticipate that will cause a future budget pressure is because there is an expectation at this stage that interest rates will start to steadily fall over the next 2 years. And actually, therefore, the bit I am proposing that we take out will be matched. I'm fairly confident will be matched by falling interest rates, which would therefore will mean that the budget pressure isn't pushed forward. What it does, however, though, is deny us the opportunity to build balances by 654,000. And then also then to take out the capital financing that was for the 24-25 capital programme, which again won't fall due in 24-25 because it doesn't occur until the year after, of 763,000. For that, though, there will be an element of pushing the pressure on to the following year, because although interest rates will fall and therefore the interest element of that 763,000 may not be quite as high in the following year, the borrowing cost is still there, and therefore with that element, it is pushing the pressure on. But nonetheless, as I say, reflecting the fact that that cash won't actually be needed in next year's budget. So in 6.25, therefore, there's a proposal that we reduce those capital financing costs by 654,000 and 763,000 respectively. So moving then on to reserves and balances, obviously, whilst I, in my professional capacity, I'm strongly advising you to not use any of the reserves other than the £407,000 already indicated. I've obviously referenced it in the report because, of course, it has the potential to form part of any budget equation, and certainly in many other authorities, balances are forming part of their budget equation. But as I say, apart from the 407,000, I would really strongly be urging members not to seek to use balances any more. And I'm certainly confident or hopeful that certainly Councillor Anne and others will endorse and be supportive of that. So moving then finally to council tax. The remaining resource shortfall after the various things I've already outlined and discussed is 6.875 million. A 1% increase in council tax raises 711,000 net of council tax reduction scheme. And therefore, well, to just reference then that we know that the fire authority levy is 547,000, if we have remembered the figure correctly. So effectively, we would need to raise 0.77% in council tax to pay for the fire levy, and therefore we would require to balance this budget an 8.9% increase on council tax for council services. So 8.9 for council services, 0.77 for fire, which therefore equates to an overall uplift of 9.67%. And that amounts to a Band D equivalent increase of 140.67 per week. I've outlined in table 5, apologies, I'm about to cough, so bear with me. Yeah, in table 5, I've outlined the impact on bands D, C and B. And just for information, I've set out there that 62% of our residents are in band D, C and B, and actually 72% of our residents are in bands A, B, C and D. So just to draw that to your attention. And obviously for the 50 for the 10,500 households that are in receipt of council tax reduction scheme, then obviously subject quite to their entitlement under CTRS, that potentially would lead to no increase. And for those 21,500 residents in receipt of single person discount, that attracts a 25% discount, and obviously therefore I've presented those figures in table 5. So in terms of council tax, then, as I say, to reiterate, the proposed budget allows for 8.9% to fund council services and 0.77 to fund the fire levy. So I've summarised in table 6 all of those different elements that I've talked through, and effectively you can see that they in total address the resource shortfall. Moving on to the budget consultation. The council undertook a budget consultation for the first time this year. It was open during the 8th of January till the 2nd of February. We had 1,652 responses, which actually is very positive in the context of consultations generally. And obviously a detailed report has been prepared in relation to those consultation results, which is in Appendix 10. But I've just summarised in the report some high-level information in relation to that. And effectively what you can see in paragraph 7.2 is that people ranked what was important to them and to their communities, and effectively the top 6 services that were ranked were emptying bins, recycling and waste, schools and education, supporting vulnerable people, roads and infrastructure, swimming pools, and the fire service. And I have in table 7 allocated or reflected the budget in terms of our net movement in our budget, which will be in total 16.7 million. How that has been allocated across all of our services, and what it shows is effectively that the prime funding that we have had available to us, and in terms of the proposals here today, effectively reflect that the funding is going to effectively those top services that are valued most by our residents. So I hope that, as I say, I'm sure that there's lots of detail in the actual report, but in the appendix. But I hope that gives confirmation to our residents ultimately that the decisions potentially going to be taken by council demonstrate that funding is being directed to those things that our residents value the most. So I've just summarised in 7.6 effectively some key points about these proposals, and in recognition of that. So as I say, the proposals here today have reduced the decrease in the school's budget from 6% to 5.5%. It's rejected the budget reduction in relation to nappy collections. It's reduced the increased fee for telecare. It has funded the critical element of the deprivation of liberty safeguarding business case, and it has increased the funding relating to pupil numbers and the complexity for Ysgol Gogarth. So not only does that reflect, I guess, the priorities of our residents, but actually it also reflects the priorities set out by Welsh Government in the additional letter around the additional funding, which was that it be directed for education and for social care. I have also attached in Appendix 9 an updated medium-term financial plan, and I've set out in Table 8 of this report details of what the pressures are looking like, should I say, for the following 2 years. And unfortunately, you can see from there that the pressure continues to be relentless, and we have still got difficult times ahead, which feels very uncomfortable for all of us, I'm sure. But they're challenges for tomorrow, I guess, for the minute. I also have set out in table 9 the risks that are still within the budget. I've mentioned some of them. We are simply not in the game of being able to eradicate risk from our budget. The level of funding that we've been provided from Welsh Government, the restriction ultimately on how much we can fairly raise through council tax means that we have no choice but to carry some risk within our budget. We have, however, sought to minimise that risk, and the risk is in those places that is most prudent, as it were. But I can't get away from the fact that there is risk within the budget, and obviously, if any of that comes to fruition, then that will lead to in-year pressure, which will require mitigation in year and/or use of balances. So to draw that out to your attention, and then I know we've discussed it before, and we're fortunately not in this position, but I really would stress once again this overlying risk around the need for a Section 114 notice, and thankfully, and I absolutely echo Charlie's points around all of the work by services, by heads of service, by portfolio holders, etc., and all of us in collectively seeking to come to what is hopefully a balanced budget proposal for consideration by council. But there is still this underlying risk and concern around the financial viability of local government across the piece, I guess. And just this morning, there was again a press report around Cheshire East needing to seek financial assistance because it is seeking to stave off the potential of Section 114 notice. So, as I say, we're not there, thankfully. But I really, we can't lose sight of it being a risk for us. So in terms of the next steps, obviously, for your consideration here today, for Cabinet's proposed recommended budget on to Council tomorrow and Council on the 29th, where members can obviously make their final decisions, appreciating that there is a lot of things in this budget that feel very uncomfortable and unpalatable, but unfortunately, we're operating in the environment that we're operating, and I hope that this is a fair budget proposal for you to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And before we go to members' questions, I'd just like to thank you and the team and all the heads of service and their teams for the incredible amount of work that's gone into this. And before you finish, please could you just touch more for us on the additional budget reduction proposals at page 80? I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 new proposals have come in: education, economy and culture, etc., etc. Could you just lay out what those mean to residents and to services? Thanks, Amanda.
Yes, of course. Yeah, so pardon me. So on page 80, as you say, there are 6 effectively new budget proposals, so budget reduction proposals, which equate to 341,000. So just to run through them in detail. So in the original budget proposals, there was a reduction from education to do with the schools modernisation programme, and it was in previously at 135,000. In fairness, Lowry had originally put it forward as 300,000, and I'd reduced it down to 135,000 because I wanted to make sure I understood what was being proposed. In the meantime, I've had that dialogue with Lowry and her team, and I understand, and actually, therefore, that the full 300 is coming forward. So it's an additional 165,000 on the 135. And what that is, and effectively, it's a little bit akin to the points I was making about capital financing. So within the education service revenue budget, they have revenue budget which is sat that to fund the borrowing costs to do with the capital programme. And you'll recall in the existing capital programme, there is a £2 million budget for school development, and that was obviously there to be put towards the highest priority, following the work that was being done about the future school developments. I think that's now been decided that that's going to be spent in relation to Ysgol Gogarth, but because the borrowing costs won't flow until after the budget, after the spend has happened, and the spend will happen during this next year, then effectively that revenue budget won't be needed in cash terms in 24-25 for that purpose, and therefore it's being given up on a non-recurring basis. So you'll see in column 4 it's non-recurring, because the following year it will be needed to fund the capital financing to do with that £2 million scheme. So it's merely a cash, giving a one-off cash because it's not needed because of the timing of the capital spend, and that therefore has no impact on anyone. In reality, the next one is shared prosperity. So economy and culture across the range of its services has attracted and had benefit of a lot of shared prosperity funding, and there are some small elements of that effectively offset underlying budget, and therefore that can be given up as additional income. So that's that one, and again, that one has no impact on anything in inequalities terms. The next one is that we hold a corporate budget for long service awards, where staff with certain lengths of service are given a cash sum. The proposal here is that is removed. That will be obviously subject to some debate, and therefore that's why it's only been assessed as having assessed as having risk around its deliverability, and obviously there would be some adverse internal impact, because staff who are at that length of service might feel aggrieved, I guess. So that's to be considered. The next one is some historic pension costs, where effectively we have as it says, we have historic pension costs that we have to pay relating to, I think, former employees prior to reorganisation, as sadly those people die off. That cost comes down. So it's one of those funny ones. But having re-looked at the budgets, that's about 25,000 less than we have in the budget. So that's again coming out, and that has no adverse impact. The next one is to do with the Excellence Fund. Again, this one actually is a one-off, and it says it's non-recurring because the Excellence Fund has actually managed to attract SPF funding. So the work of the SPF, the work in terms of the awards in terms of the Excellence Fund for the coming year will be being funded from SPF, and therefore the underlying corporate budget that we hold can be released on a one-off basis. It will go back in the following year, obviously. It could be reconsidered again in the future, but that's what that one is. So that one has no adverse impact equally. And then I can't actually recall off the top of my head what the specific was of the corporate contribution, but I think we pay again a range of subscriptions and for various publications and whatever you that are used across the organisation. And again, I think when we looked at what we were actually spending compared to the budget, we felt we could reduce it down by £14,000. So again, no adverse impact. So I think all of those, with the exception of the long service award for consideration of 8,000, I think all of those are as I say, have no impact and are achievable savings. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I should maybe have declared an interest and someone soon to be a pensioner, just in case you try and kill the answer. Thank you. Thanks very much for that further explanation. Okay, we're going to open it up to members' questions. The first speaker we've got is Councillor Dilwyn. Cymraeg?
Cymraeg, os gai. Diolch yn fawr chi. Yn gynta, mae gen I isio ychwanegu i be mae'r cadeirydd wedi dweud a be mae'r arweinydd wedi dweud, sef gair o werthfawrogiad i'r gwaith mae Amanda wedi rhoi i fewn i hwn i cael ni leidau ni heddiw. Dim just Amanda, dwi'n mynd i dweud Amanda a'r tîm. Mae genna ni swyddogion o lawer iawn o wahanol adrannau yma hefo ni heddiw. Mae genna i isio rhoi gair o ddiolch iddyn nhw am y ffordd maen nhw wedi cydweithio a cydweithredu hefo'i gilydd i gael ni i lle yda ni heddiw. Dydy o ddim wedi bod yn anodd, hawdd, mae wedi bod yn anodd, dio ddim wedi bod yn hawdd. Hefyd, yr arweinydd a'i gabinet ma'n nhwtha wedi gweithio yn galed iawn a gwneud penderfyniadau calad. Mae wedi bod yn flwyddyn anodd. Mae wedi bod yn flwyddyn anodd ar y cyhoedd ac mi roedd hyn yn gefn meddwl bob un ohonyn nhw pan nhw'n dod i'r penderfyniadau yma. Ac dwi'n siŵr bod nhw yn sylweddoli y bod ni'na hefyd fel aelodau yn sylweddoli y pwysau maen nhw wedi bod o dan. Does am dwy waith am hynny. Mae Lenny bod yn flwyddyn anodd. Mae ystyriaethau nhw hefyd yn deud bod nhw yn meddwl am pa mor anodd mae'n mynd i fod flwyddyn nesaf. A does ddim dwy waith nad ydy hynny yn mynd i ddigwydd. Dwi'n teimlo y bod ni fel Pwyllgor Chraffu hefyd wedi gwneud yn rhan. Da ni wedi cael adroddiadau lu. Lawer iawn o waith allan yn aml iawn, ond mae o wedi bod werth o. Mae wedi bod werth allan mwyn ni wybod yn union lle mae'r cyngor arni heddiw. Mae yna gwestiynau wedi cael ei gofyn yn fama a gwestiynau oedd yn heiddi cael ei gofyn, ond beth sydd wedi bod yn dda ydy bod ni wedi medru cael ateb i'r gwestiynau yna i gyd trwy gydol y misoedd dwytha yma. Mae ymgynghoriad y cyhoedd yn ddiddorol yn y ffaith be maen nhw wedi ddewis fel eu 6 ucha ac dwi'n gweld hwnnw yn dod â negas bendant i ni y bod y cyhoedd yn sylweddoli bod rhaid i ni wario arian yn ddoeth sydd be da ni yn wneud, ond hefyd wrth wneud hynny bod y costa yn codi. Felly ar ôl deud hynny a dangos yn werthfawrogiad i'r pawb sydd wedi bod yn ymwneud efo hwn, dwi am os gai cadeirydd gynnig yr argymellion. Dwi'n teimlo o dan 2-1 bod y Pwyllgor Trosglwyddo a Chraffu Cyllid yma ac Adnoddau bod ni wedi craffu trwy gydol y flwyddyn ar adroddiadau ac dwi beth bynnag yn argoeddedig ac yn barod i fedru gwneud argymelliad priodol i'r cabinet fel mae o dan 2-2 bod ni'n cymeradwyo cynigion y gyllideb am lenellir yn habl 6 yn atodiad 1 ac argymell y cyllid i'r cyngor. Diolch fawr cadeirydd.
Diolch, Councillor Dilwyn. So we have a proposal. Right, questions, members. Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Just first like to build on what Dilwyn says and second his proposal. I think Mike and then Charlie subsequently have done a really excellent job, particularly in involving those councillors who want to be involved in the fine detail. And I'd also commend the Cabinet for that, because they, alongside the officers as well, the senior officers, have always, with me, shown great patience and have answered my questions. We've had some robust discussions sometimes, but it's been a very positive process, and really any councillor who wanted, in a sense, to get their hands dirty in working through all this information and having the hard discussions, they cannot say that they haven't had the opportunity. And I think people need to be commended on that. It was pretty good the first year I became a councillor. It became even better this year. And I really I think we need to put on record that process, that if people wanted to put forward a cut or a saving or argue about a council tax amount, and I certainly have, then they had that opportunity. And so that's, I think, very positive. I think the other thing, because of the risks, again, that Amanda has been very sort of open and honest about, I think the medium-term financial plan, the document Appendix 9 in the report, is really a significant step forward. And I think councillors across the piece have argued about a medium-term financial plan or strategy. It's still not there totally, but it certainly identifies the areas of work which we're going to have to be working on very hard over the next period. And I'm hoping we will get regular scrutiny reports on how those parts of the plan come forward. The one small thing, and I wonder if this could be amended to Dilwyn's proposals, is one of the cuts which, and of course every councillor will have had cuts and savings that they feel uncomfortable about, and council tax increases that they're uncomfortable about. So none of us are immune to that. The one that does concern me, and again, not because Gareth was fully open about it right from the start, both in the Budget Working Group and the SPR, was the cut to the Citizens Advice Bureau funding, which obviously Citizens Advice Bureau across the county is very important. They do great work assisting particularly vulnerable residents, digitally challenged residents, and work very closely, I know, with revenue and benefits to maximise both income for our low income and low wealth residents. My modest proposal is, and I know that they're getting new funding through the Shared Prosperity Fund, CAB, but that hasn't finally, I don't think, been signed off yet. So what I would ask, and it is only a modest proposal, is that could we have a report in 6 months' time on how that cut to CAB and how the Shared Prosperity Fund monies are assisting CAB to continue their services? So I don't think it's controversial. I think it's us as a council across the piece just monitoring that situation, because it does impact so significantly on our most vulnerable residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Yeah, I would say that would be a better use of Shared Prosperity Fund than car parks or paddling pools, wouldn't you? It helps so many residents, so thank you. No, you're on your best behaviour today. You've obviously been on the naughty step. Yeah, you certainly can.
Yeah, Chair, it's just to clarify, because essentially Councillor Dilwyn's proposal was as per paragraph 2.2, essentially to to recommend to Cabinet the budget proposals are set out in Table 6 of Appendix 1 and recommend the budget to Council. And Councillor Paul seconded that. But then proposed an amendment. So technically, can we just ask Councillor Dilwyn, are you just happy to add that to the original proposal? And that's a report in 6 months' time on how the cuts to the Citizens Advice Bureau and the SPF monies are assisting the Citizens Advice Bureau to continue their services. Are you content to add that?
Yes, I think it's a very valid point that Paul has made there about that report. But I would also assume from the reports we've been getting this year that would be something that would happen naturally during the course of the next year. So scrutiny, whichever way it goes, I don't think it compromises, you know, what Paul has suggested. I don't think it compromises my proposal in any way. So I would be willing to accept that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Dilwyn. Councillor Charlie, did you just want to come in on that point?
Yeah, specifically on that point, just to confirm that Citizens Advice Bureau successfully applied for £157,679,000 for the Community Regeneration Key Fund. They were notified by email of the board on the 16th of 1st, 24. A letter went out last week on the 12th of 2nd to confirm that. They also have a live application into the People and Skills Key Fund that'll come before the panel on the 20th of February. So they have been notified, Paul. I do recognise that there are limitations for grant funding because it's time limited. We're in the unfortunate situation that as yet we have no idea what's going to replace shared prosperity funding. But clearly it is a really important service as it is a charity. And we have to make really difficult decisions after losing £82 million out of our budgets. I don't think there's any cuts that I want to see happening, but the reality is that we have to cut our cloth accordingly. So yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Charlie. Councillor Gareth, then I've got Stephen. Yeah, Councillor Gareth.
No, Stephen's okay.
Right, thank you. Obviously the cut in school budgets from 6% to 5.5% is really, really welcome. But just to put it in context, I think Gwynedd are looking at cuts of about 2%. So that just shows the difficulty as a county that we're actually facing. You know, my understanding is that a lot of schools are having to look at voluntary redundancies to achieve their budget. So I just wondered, do we know at this stage how many staff we're going to be losing in schools and how much that will actually cost in redundancy costs? And has that actually been factored into the budgets? Do you want to pick them up point by point, or shall I just run through everything?
And then go to the next one, if that's, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. So in terms of schools, we don't have the specific details as yet. I know that we've had 23 schools have already applied to our redundancy process, and those meetings are ongoing. They started last week. I have asked for details around the number of staff and the costings of that, but because we're still kind of early in the process, we can't have it. I know how much the cost implications were for last week, which are considerable. But I think until we have the bigger picture, I don't want to single that out just now because I don't want it obviously to impact on any individuals that may form part of that. But 23 schools are already in the process, and it would seem possibly a further 16 schools will need to come forward with voluntary redundancies. I haven't heard anything around compulsory redundancies yet, but obviously that would typically be the next stage if they can't find those savings through voluntary redundancies. But I have asked for those figures as soon as possible, and they're hoping that perhaps after the next meeting we'll have a better idea as to what those figures are likely to be. But they will be considerable, and you know we're conscious of that. I know I've certainly mentioned it to Amanda a number of times as to how much that may likely come to, but yeah, it's going to be a lot of money.
So I suppose my question is, have we, in your consideration, have we built in a suitable budget to take account of those costs in these calculations?
I think any redundancy costs will have to fall on to balances.
Sorry, Councillor, just expand on that a minute. I was just going to ask in what budget line does the money sit for all these redundancies that it has to come out?
So obviously redundancy costs are a one-off by nature, and therefore we'll have to fund it from balances, which again is another reason why we will need to protect our balances otherwise.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gareth.
Yeah. My second point is looking at the revenue business case submissions. You know, my personal view is I'm struggling to see how 60,000 on an equalities officer actually trumps some of the other business cases, such as the manager for the emergency duty team or staff for looking after the safeguarding liberties or a virtual head. You know, that's one point. My third point is, yeah, thank you, Amanda, for the detailed explanation on the risk with the wage increases. To me, that sounds like an acceptable risk and an acceptable place to go. What I find difficult on the risks is that on page 64, there's still a high risk that we can't actually deliver the budget cuts, because that is one of the few things under our control. Wage increases and things like that, there's little we can do to control those. But I think we should do everything that we can to actually get our budget costs down to make them at least a medium risk rather than a high risk. And whilst we're on the subject of risks, I think one of the unacceptable risks that we're taking is that we're not actually putting anything into the reserves. You know, we've talked about the 654,000 and the 763,000, which is pushed into next year. And we look at the way budgets are going on the, you know, on that medium-term financial plan. Things aren't going to get easier anytime soon, and we're going to be looking at significant cuts to services next year and the year after. And I strongly believe that we should be putting money into reserves so that we can actually invest a bit in services, so that we've got a pot there to actually pay for, you know, that dreaded word transformation, so that we're not dealing with this again this time next year, where we've just got cuts across the board, that we can actually tell our ratepayers, actually, we've got a plan here. We're trying to do something about it. We're trying to change the way we deliver services, and we've actually got a pot of money to put towards it. So I'd actually like to table a motion that we actually put some money into reserves, that we actually have a strategy for transformation, and that we actually allocate, I understand that we don't want to increase council taxes, and maybe we have that compromise that instead of doing the 654 and the 743, that we just say we're going to add 500,000 into reserves this year, specifically to try and keep council tax lower in future years, next year and the year after, that we've got a plan to do something about it, to change and invest in services and change the way we deliver them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Gareth. Councillor Charlie, did you want to come in?
I totally agree with Gareth that our reserves are an issue. It's something that's essentially haunted me since I joined this council. However, we're at the stage now where you would have to have it, for me, specific as to where that money is coming from. It'll either have to be a cut to go in there, or it'll have to be an increase in council tax, and that is the balance. I don't see any other way around that. The principle is right, but the reality is, for most of these risks and most of these increase in our reserves, the only thing we're left with is council tax. We had posted the highest rate last year. I'm acutely conscious that people are going to struggle. So yeah, it'd be useful if you could sort of identify where that money would actually come from, that would, and how we'd make up that gap. Thank you.
Well, if we don't do it, then are we confident that we've got enough reserves to actually do something about the fact that we know we've got significant cuts coming next year and the year after? Because sometimes you have to, to change the way we deliver services undoubtedly costs money. And we need, I feel, to, one, give the services some reassurance that we've got a plan, but also give our ratepayers some assurances that we've got a plan to tackle this. We can see it coming. Now, it could well be, Charlie, that yes, we've got an asset management plan there for disposable assets that is going to generate the funds to do this. But without that medium-term asset management plan, I personally can't identify where the money's going to come from. Now, if that is the case, then yeah, that's fair enough. But at least we've got a plan and we've got a strategy about how we're going to tackle it and how we're going to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Gareth. Councillor Charlie, did you want to come back there?
Yeah, I think, I recognise that we've seen Pembrokeshire going out with a 16% council tax increase, and is it Carrickdignon going out with 14%. Both of those actually had a better settlement than Conwy. They're about 25% higher in what they actually received. So, we have worked really hard to get that below 10%. It'll be of cold comfort to many people, but we could have gone with 14, 15, 16%. And that would have put ourselves in a stronger position regards our reserves. I think we have to find a balance, and that is what a balanced budget is. The old saying in politics, you can't please all the people all the time. I think with a budget here that pleases nobody, there's lots of compromises, there is risk. But let's be clear, this is a projection of spend for the following financial year. We have some really positive stuff going on in terms of our children looked after. We've Boydenthall open, and we've Ingleside. We have Glanaravan is being built this year. We've had Sylvia Gardens. We've got a new head of housing coming in. We need to look to drive those budgets down. So we do have limited headroom, but there is an opportunity. I think we've shown this year in terms of bringing that budget overspend down from 10 million to 1.7 million, albeit some concerns about what that actually means. We can to a certain extent turn it on, turn it off. During the COVID, this council was, for me, it was the best time to be a councillor. We were given the money to do what we needed to do. We got the homeless off the streets. We rehabilitated them. We handed out £70 million to our businesses and kept them afloat. If we're given funds, we can do some really, really good stuff. If we can't, we have to do less of that. And there is a balance there. But yeah, so there is risk. There is an increase in council tax that'll be uncomfortable. There are cuts that'll be uncomfortable. But in the round, I think this is the best possible solution we can give. Paul, you're quite right. Everyone will pick little bits out of it and go, well, we could do this, we could do that. But then we have to have a drive as a council to find solutions. I've had some really positive meetings with the leader of Denbighshire and the chief executive about exploring ways we can look to work together as a council. We share a public service board. They get significantly more funding than us, so they might want to pass them over our way. But we need to look at that. We've got the national park in terms of sharing tree officers and conservation officers. I chair the North Wales Leadership Group. Again, I'm really keen for the 6 leaders to actually look at ways we can work together so we can make a change, because you're right, we just carry on this trajectory. We are on the Titanic floating towards an iceberg, but we are where we are. We need to produce a legally balanced budget this year. We need to have a council tax which reflects the magnitude of the charge we put last year. And then we need to try and find some solutions, Gareth. So it is that balance, and it'll never be perfect. And as I say, it probably pleases nobody, but that probably in some respects puts it in a place where it's probably the fairest thing that we can do, to be quite honest. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. I've got Councillor Anne, then Reid.
Thanks, Chair. What a complex report, and a really good debate so far. I just want to put on record, it goes without saying, but a 2.3% increase in funding for Conwy in these historic times of high inflation, high taxes and high demand is absolutely morally bankrupt. And there's a good argument for saying that both governments are actually failing our residents and failing public services in general. But that's a negative. If I was to move on, I think it would be completely wrong of me not to mention the budget consultation that Amanda and Charlie, for the first time, have agreed to undertake. I think I think the response rate of, was it 1600 plus, was a really good start. I think the feedback was really good. I was particularly heartened to see that Conwy West had the highest response rate at 31%, and there's reasons for that. And I was particularly pleased to see that Pembrokeshire ward specifically was mentioned, because there's a lot of consultation and two-way feedback within residents within the ward. So really pleased to see that, and that in actual fact feedback has been acted upon as well, is really important. On the downside, I have to say, this time last year, we were not just looking at, we were looking at feedback, we were looking at the specific feedback from our schools. Now, Gareth has mentioned schools, and so have others before me. But where's the budget consultation feedback? There was a closing date for the 2nd of February on a survey to schools. And from schools' perspective, that wasn't just an equality impact assessment, that was about giving feedback on the impact of us imposing 6% on them. But despite having the same closing date, I'm really disappointed that Finance and Resources are here considering budget cuts and council tax increases, and we actually don't have that sort of feedback. I mean, we already are aware that head teachers have written to Charlie and Reen. They've written to Welsh Government, and out of desperation, they've actually written also to parents. And I'm not going to repeat it, but you know, their feedback to us and to all of those other people is actually pretty hair-raising and shocking, because they really are, they're at wit's end in terms of delivering what they're paid to do around ALN, new curriculum, etc. And so we haven't actually had any consultation with our schools. Now, when we put together the budget reductions, we actually had feedback from all the services bar schools in terms of what they could afford. And they all put forward figures. A lot of them are well below the 10% that was discussed with all services. And we accepted them at face value. We actually haven't had any such feedback from our schools. There's been an assumption of 6%. I listened into Cabinet, I think it was last week, where Cabinet, without much discussion, without any sort of detailed analysis, just agreed to accept a 6% imposition of a cut to schools. My question here is, what was that proposal based on? Where was the evidence? Where was the assumption? Where was the consultation with our schools? Because I'm not aware that any have been made, and I actually think we're actually being unfair to our schools in treating them differently from every other service area. And I think also we're in danger of not recognising the harm that we are potentially inflicting on each and every one of our schools if we impose this £4.1 million reduction on them in these difficult sort of times. So first question I would have is around, what's the 6% increase being based on? Where's it come from? Because there's been no consultation, and I appreciate that it's obviously been reduced to 5.5% on the back of another just under 200 grand, I think it was, from Welsh Government that we've passported across to schools. So that's my first question. I've got others. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anne. Councillor Julie, do you want to come in as a Cabinet member?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for raising that, Anne. I had every intention of sharing this information, but I was just waiting for the discussion first of all. So obviously we had a discussion at FROSC, at the last FROSC, I think it was, and at Cabinet, and we had a discussion at School Budget Forum, and as a result created an online survey for schools to complete, requiring details of the budget reductions that they anticipated they'd have to make to meet at that point the proposed 6%, which obviously, as we've discussed today, is being proposed at 5.5%, which is a 378,000 reduction in the savings being sought. It also, looked at the effects of equalities. So out of our 59 schools that this was sent to, 45 schools responded within a very tight deadline. So I'd like to say thank you to the schools, certainly for turning this around in such quick time. There was no requirement for 8 schools to respond due to the small school protection. So as in previous years, schools use a combination of ways in order to obtain a balanced budget. In order to meet the indicative, as I said at that point, 6% reduction to the ISB, the schools noted that 73% of our schools will be facing redundancies. We've already touched on that today, in so much as the figures I gave you before as to how many schools are coming along. 80% of our schools will be facing other staff reductions. I've mentioned this before, so often you have temporary staff, so it's non-replacement of those temporary staff or perhaps those who retire. 58% of our schools will be reducing their spend on building maintenance. 62% of our schools will be reducing their spend on supplies and services. 38% of our schools will be requiring a discussion around the new bridging loan that we have as a local authority, and 84% of schools will be using their balances. 35% of our schools noted other ways, which included teaching assistants will be covering PPA duties rather than teachers, reducing the number of intervention groups held, reducing support for learning and emotional well-being. Hang on one second, sorry. Also, one must remember a number of these funds have been raised through, that's using the school fund, sorry, with one school looking at using this method if they're not able to achieve setting their balanced budget. The risks that schools have highlighted in the survey, reducing curriculum provision, again, which has been mentioned before, both at GCSE and A level, extracurricular activities being reduced, merging of year groups, having skeleton staff in school, raises issues around safeguarding, increased workload to staff, recruitment, retention problems. I mean, obviously this is all, you know, it's what we expect because we're talking about a significant reduction. And I would just make a plea because, you know, as Charlie said, there isn't money somewhere that's being hidden. This is the position that we're in because of decisions that have been taken in Westminster, then decisions that are taken in Cardiff. And we're constantly trying to find a way of balancing things. And, you know, as was touched on before, the additional money, albeit not very much that we've had, the majority of that's been directed to education and then the rest to social care. So every opportunity we have, we're trying to address it over the years. We've had 0% at times reductions to schools. So yeah, it's frustrating to sit here and read this information, but you know, we've gone from what was projected to be a possible 10% reduction to 5.5. And actually, because it's taken from the opening budget to schools, that won't be 5.5. That will probably be more like 5.3, maybe 5.2% reduction. I mean, I'm conscious, obviously, there are a number of people still wanting to speak, but staff morale and well-being obviously is a real issue that we need to be conscious of moving through the year. And my hope is that UK government, Welsh government, listen to this, listen to all local authorities when they say, please fund us appropriately so that these changes don't happen, because this will have an impact. It'll have an impact on children and outcomes. And it's, you know, it's not fair sitting talking to head teachers. You know, I despair. I want to say, okay, great, we'll find this money from somewhere, but it just isn't forthcoming. So I would ask every party that has an opportunity to highlight this to do that. And then just to finish, Chair, and I'm happy to share this information with members of the committee, but in terms of the equalities and the Welsh language impact, so schools have reported the main three effects of cuts on equalities is 73% of schools said the Welsh language will be impacted. Not a figure that any of us want to hear. 52% said disability will be impacted, and 51% said socio-economic considerations will be impacted. So no, it does not make for good reading, but we will continue to do all we can, and I hope all of us working together take every opportunity to lobby. Like I say, this is not political point scoring. I'm independent. I don't care about any of that. But if we can lobby the government in Westminster, the government in Cardiff, which I know is happening, but maybe shout a little louder to say, please fund local authorities appropriately so that we don't have to sit here listening to feedback like this from our schools. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Julie, and you know, commend yourself. You went to speak to the Education Minister, didn't you, to make the plea? And I think it's shocking that the Welsh Government have prioritised 20 miles an hour and green initiatives and is it 35 more Senedd members over educating our children properly. We're all parents, grandparents, or have a passion about education, and this is just shocking. So thank you for that. Councillor Charlie, was that on the same point?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And if you look, if total funding of 4.6 million, I've said our wages is around 21 million, the school alone would eat all that up. So it is immoral not to actually fund what you've actually offered. Essentially, you've given these pay rises, and then you don't give us the money. What I would do, members will be aware we had an Estrin report. This was an excellent Estrin report, and I just want to quote from page 12 in there, which said that the local authority prioritises funding for education. Leaders have sought to protect schools from budget cuts experienced by other services. However, this may be more challenging in the near future given the authority's current financial position and low levels of usable reserves. Historically, Conway's net education budget was consistently above the Wales average, but in 21-22, this has fallen in line with the Wales average. So, we have, where we can, look to protect school buildings. We could, in reality, put a higher council tax figure up. 1% of council tax roughly equates to 1% for schools. So if we wanted to give the schools no cuts, then we're looking at about 14-15%. I think we are uncomfortably high at 9.67%, including the fire levy. But that is a choice if members want to make it, that they could propose at a higher rate and pass that on to schools, because there's nowhere else to look. We've looked under every stone, and that's where we're at in terms of the process.
Thanks, Councillor Charlie. I think the Chief Executive wanted to come in before we then go to
No,
Councillors
I haven't finished.
Oh, sorry, Anne. Sorry. You have another question. Sorry.
No, well, I mean, thanks to Julie and to Charlie for those responses, and obviously we're all in this together. But for me, the process, the journey, is really important. And whilst there's been some good feedback there. First of all, I'd ask Julie to publish so that the public can read that feedback, because I would have expected that to be in this Frost report this morning. But the second point is, nobody's come back to me about on what assumptions did Cabinet make this indicative 6% cut, because they haven't had any feedback from schools. They haven't done that sort of consultation. They've done it with other services and allowed them to be 1.5, 3.75. All of a sudden, schools, it's just seemed to pluck the figure of 6% out of the air. And if you do that with no evidence or feedback in terms of how you've achieved that, it's difficult to swallow. And I think that's a position that I find myself in, because how is that a sustainable figure? How is that a sustainable figure when actually we haven't consulted anybody and we haven't based it on any evidence? But, rather than take up the conversation any further, I think I'll sort of just move on. The next thing I'd like to move on to.
Councillor Anne, Councillor Julie said she wants to come back in.
Okay, right, smashing.
Okay.
Thanks.
We'll go to your next question.
I mean, obviously, I mentioned earlier, Harry asked me the question around what engagement we have and what opportunity myself and Charlie as the finance portfolio holder has, and certainly as the wider Cabinet. And, I think I touched on so many points there that you could appreciate that in terms of the information. We had the school budget forum, the head teacher engagement meeting, we had the education budget working group, we had the schools budget working group, which, as I said before, numerous head teachers were there, and they gave us scenarios as to what each school would look like in terms of budget reductions. And Amanda shared at the school budget forum and at the head teacher engagement meeting, which we meet monthly, where we're at and what we're working towards. And schools were given between 5% and 10%, and they were working from what 5% might look like, what 7.5% might look like, and what 10% would look like. And that conversation has been ongoing for many months. So we didn't pluck a figure from the sky, far from it. We have been discussing over and over and over the implications of this. And I don't know if you attended the schools budget working group, but you would have seen there that those things were laid out for us, exactly what that looked like. And certainly the presentation that Lowry made, the information was given as to what those levels of cuts and reductions would look like. So no, it certainly wasn't plucked from the sky. But obviously, as you say, it's still for all of us to work together to attempt to reduce that. And Charlie touched on some of the things that are coming through next year, which are, in terms of children looked after, that will begin to see reductions within the pressures and demands on our budget that will give us hopefully the opportunity then to be able to perhaps tweak and change things that this year feels a little bit harder, well, not a little bit, considerably harder to do. So no, a figure wasn't plucked from the sky. This has been doing everything we can to stop it from being 10%, to bring it down. At that point, 6% felt as though that was the only option we had. However, as Amanda said, there was additional money that came forth, and the majority of that went towards schools as well. So no, a lot of work went into that, lots of discussion with schools, with head teachers, with the head of service of the education service. And yeah, it was many months of discussions that resulted in that suggestion. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Jude. No, I was in the room for that cabinet meeting. I must say that members of the cabinet did look a little startled when Councillor Chris Cater proposed the 6%. It didn't seem as though maybe it was that was on the table. I would have thought maybe you would have proposed that if that's what was going. But no, Councillor Anne, does that satisfy you on the education?
No, I don't think it
Do you
does,
wanna
because
move to your
I think it's a bit disingenuous, but I think we just agree to disagree. I'm a member of the School Business Budget Forum. I attended the working party with schools, so obviously I'm acutely aware of the narratives. But there's been no process to actually take a figure from schools overall that's been fed into the 6% that obviously I've heard this morning, or indeed that I'm aware of in the positions that I hold. But let's move on, because we are where we are. What I'd like to do now is move on to page 75, and that's about Appendix 6, the revenue business case submissions. And obviously Amanda has obviously shared the thinking that she's proposing within the recommendations here, that we just address the unavoidable pressures. But just a couple jump out to me. Being in a sort of rural coastal area, as I am, I'm acutely aware of just the criticalness of highway drainage, specifically gully maintenance. And obviously within this proposal, the 160 grand falls out. What happens therefore? What's the impact of that in terms of the service that we currently have in terms of at the moment?
Who's going to take this? Is that you, Andy, or Garrett?
Yeah, if we don't have the highway gully business case, then the level of service will be less than what we would like to have. We do have a level of service at the moment with a gully tanker and 2 crew. The business case was for additional vehicle and an additional crew to provide more resilience. Flooding is getting worse. Severe weather events are getting worse. So we will still continue to provide a service, but not to the level that we would like. But we recognise the financial constraints that the council are in, and that not every business case will be approved.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, and then the second point on this particular appendix is, obviously I've talked at length at schools, but I'd just like a bit of feedback. If we don't fund the ask of 388k for the education improvement grant, which schools have relied on for, I think, as long as I can remember, what will be the impact on schools on the back of us also taking 4.1 million from them?
Yeah, thank you, Anne, for that question. And we will have to fund that from central funds on behalf of schools.
So there'll be no impact on schools, is that what you're saying, Lowry?
If we didn't fund it, Councillor Anne, yes, there would be an impact, because the learners are already placed on those courses. Therefore, we're going to have to fund it.
Right, okay, thanks for that. And then the final question, Chair, is on, or our comments really, is on page 90, which is the medium-term financial plan. I would just, first of all, again, like to congratulate Amanda. In my recollection as a councillor, I've never seen such a a complete, credible, strategic and action orientated midterm financial plan. So, well done, Amanda. However, just a couple of additional things. Should we not, within the range of areas of strategic focus, add in the area of the increasing complex needs need for ALN provision in schools? I don't think that's covered within the areas identified there. And I think with the impact of 4.1 million potentially being removed on the back of just under 4 million last year, part of what the big loss will be is those ALN TAs that ended up obviously all being within schools' own sort of budget. So I'm really concerned that given the agenda around ALN and new curriculum, that's a real area where we're potentially hitting the iceberg, to quote sort of Charlie. So just thought I would mention that. And then the other one is, this is a bit of something I'm reluctant to raise, but at this stage in our funding crisis, should we not be putting within this medium-term financial plan to talk about amalgamation with other councils as being potentially part of a sustainable and resilient council going forward? Thanks, Chair.
Just on the last point, Anne, as I said previously, I've started conversations with other leaders with Denbighshire, given our proximity and given the similarities of our geography, topography, population size, etc. But certainly the North Wales level as well. I'm really keen for leaders to explore areas where we do work together. In terms of something more formal on that, that would require Welsh Government essentially to step in and say, this is what's going to happen. We know we've got the corporate joint committees. How they pan out remains to be seen, but I would be committed to finding any solution that we can because we can't carry on like this. I'm the leader at the moment, but I'll come and go like tomorrow's chip paper. It's the long-term survivability of local government is at risk, I think, if we don't change the way we're funding things. So yeah, I would be committed to doing that, but we don't have the ability to just amalgamate with another council. But certainly, I would look for every opportunity to work hand in hand with other authorities.
But it's something we could ask Welsh Government, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'd be keen to see something, if people want to put an idea, as elected members, we get reports, we look at it. If we think it's a good idea, we vote for it at the end of the day. And, I'm open to anything, essentially.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Are you content, Councillor Anne?
Haven't had an answer on the ALN sort of increasing need in terms of,
Perhaps I can just come in. Obviously, Councillor Anne, just from my own personal point of view, I'm not so au fait with the detail of that, but I absolutely am happy to have appropriate conversations with Lowry, and we can reflect that as appropriate in future iterations of the report.
Thanks, Amanda. Much appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got Reen, then we've got Councillor Abdul, Paul, and Harry. Reen, you're very quiet.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have been trying to come in, but the conversation is moving on rapidly. So no, just a couple of points. I'll address some of the points that Councillor Gareth raised, but on a general point, I think this is the most challenging times that we've ever seen in local government, and you'll see that nationally across the whole of Britain. We have regular weekly, if not daily, reports of local authorities across the country, either applying for emergency provisions or Section 114. So this is a crisis for our sector at the moment that needs to be addressed. I guess from our perspective, it's a bit of a double whammy really, because the funding streams that are coming through to us are limited, but also even within that, our piece of that cake is diminishing. So you'll see from Amanda's report around over the past years, we've lost around 3.7 million due to population decrease. Now that population decrease is 450 people in a period of 10 years, which has resulted in 3.6 or 3.7 million. And Amanda will correct me if I'm wrong here, over the past 2 years coming out of our settlement. So that on top of the limitations within the settlement, which Councillor Charlie has indicated, is causing significant pressures. And I probably also need to make the point around acknowledging, and I'm a pain to thank Amanda, because everybody has thanked Amanda, but I feel it would be remiss of me not to thank Amanda and the team. But it's been an incredible strain on all officers within the county at every level. You know, we engage regularly with our managers, and we see the strain all of this is having on our staff. So I think we all need to consider that. In terms of plans moving forward, yes, I agree with Councillor Gareth around any changes that we want to undertake in terms of the way we operate will need an element of investment. And you'll see from the medium-term financial plan, there are various streams of work that we have identified that we will move into over the next couple of months. Actually, as it turns out, the first week in March will be the first discussions. And Amanda, me and Gareth had initial discussions with SIPFA last week around various things, which is really good, actually, around moving that forward as quick as we can. I guess it's a bit of putting the cart before the horse. You know, we need to identify what we need to do, and then maybe through the democratic process, then identify money. You know, we do it regularly, don't we, on spend to save with members around how we can invest in order to get something out, and that will become a theme. So I can assure Councillor Gareth that is certainly within my thinking, and Amanda and the senior the strategic leadership team around that. And some of that will be around assessing corporately our needs, but also how we deliver efficiently and effectively moving forward. An element of that will have to be digital transformation, I would imagine. But also, of course, as Councillor Charlie has indicated, we don't want to recreate the wheel either. So, you know, other organisations across the north will have different ideas. I know everybody's doing more or less the same thing. So having that open conversation with our neighbours and across the region and nationally, actually, will be extremely valuable to us. And while I'm sure that we haven't missed anything as we've moved through this process, clearly, as times move forward and options become more available to us around joint working or digitalisation, I think that it does open some avenues to us. I remember back in 2011, at the outset of the last financial crisis, there was lots of talk then around amalgamations and around joint working. And to be fair, I think there's been a lot of window dressing around that over the years. We've had some projects that have worked and some that haven't developed. So I think this is the time to be thinking, you know, regionally around some shared services. Amalgamation would require legislation, and that's a different conversation, and that's a very political conversation. So I'm not going to get involved in that at the moment. But I do think expanding on what the art of the possible in terms of joint working is certainly something we need to be looking at moving forward. Not just during the next year. Let's be clear around this. This year-on-year cycle has to end at some point. We can't keep going, you know, from March to March and looking at cuts. It just won't work. There's nothing left yet. After this year, we'll be looking at very fundamental things around the way we operate, really. That's the only way we can do it. And we are very keen to move to that mid-term solution as the report Amanda's brought forward to you.
Thank you very much for that, Reen. We will now go to Councillor Abdul online. Thank you for your patience, Councillor Abdul.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me. I have a few questions as well. My first one, probably to Amanda, is regarding on our council tax demand. We clearly state the levy for the town and community council and the police and crime commissioners at the moment. Will we be able to do the same for North Wales Fire Authority? As I know there's an ongoing discussion that they should pursue that, but they haven't yet. But will we be able to put that levy on our council demand this year?
No, not actually on the bill itself. So the North Wales Fire Levy forms part of the council's overall budget, and therefore we will have to show effectively the precept for the county council, which includes that. The difference is, as you say, the town and community councils and police are shown separately because they are what are referred to as precepting bodies, whereas the fire authority is a levying body. So we can't show it separately. What we can, however, do is make sure that in the supporting communication with the bill, that we obviously emphasise and provide information that allows the bill payer to know that it covers the levy. Thank you.
Yeah, no. Thank you for that's something I knew, but I wanted to have a clarification from you because of the way you set it, the budget. Anyway, next point is that I'm glad Councillor Charlie is going to talk to other authorities, especially when Gwynedd, Conway getting 2% and Denbighshire, our neighbouring county, getting 3.71, which is not 0.1 difference. There's a 1.71 difference. So if you can ask what's the special relationship they have with Welsh government that we don't have, it'd be handy to know, because it is really unfair, isn't it? But listen, I heard everybody. We are officially in recession now as a country. And it'll be difficult for us not to support this recommendation, because if we don't, then we probably be more likely to be in severe risk of going bankrupt next year. So I know Councillor Dilwyn and Councillor Paul seconded the recommendation, but instead of the hiding and trying to make ourselves feel good that we're doing less, we're doing only 8.7 and the fire is taking that. I think if Councillor Dilwyn accept that the total tax raise going to be 9.67%, and just recommend that to the council that we go for 9.67%. Instead of making as though we're making it 8.9, but the levies for the authority, which they haven't officially agreed to. So if Councillor Dilwyn agrees to that, and also I think they made other proposal regarding citizen advising bureau, that will make it more complicated. I think in order to keep the align with the report, I think 9.67 straight tax, if they agree. Otherwise, that's what the proposal I'm going to make, Chair. And I do like to thank everyone, Amanda's team and our colleagues who's been in the different budget groups, working really hard to balance that budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Abdul, for that. Much captured that. Did you just want to ask Councillor Abdul something there?
Yeah, I'll just clarify if that's okay, Chair. I think there was an ask of Councillors Dilwyn and Paul as proposers and seconders that's added to their motion. So I'll ask that question first. My understanding of what the ask is that when the budget's put forward to council, it doesn't split the difference in percentages between the overall council tax and the part of that council tax bill that's attributable to the increase in the North Wales Fire Authority amount. Is that correct, Councillor Abdul?
That's right. Just go for a straight 9.67. Thank you, Martin.
I can't see really what the difference is going to be, because I think it was me that raised it initially to begin with, that somewhere on the bill we need to identify what is being paid to the fire authority. Yes, I agree with the Apple. We can give it as a recommendation to Cabinet that they go for the total as it is in table 6, If that's what you're asking, I've got no problem with that, as long as it's shown somewhere in the bill that comes out later on. That's and I think, Amanda, you've agreed with that in the past, that it is identified plainly how much is actually paid to the fire authority. So
Thank you,
in that
councillor.
case, no problem.
Thank you,
Paul, are you
councillor
okay
Dillon.
with that? Yeah.
Yeah, councillor Abdul, I think you were trying to make it clear for the residents, weren't you? I think that's
That's
what
right. Thank
that's
you.
what was sitting behind that, and councillors Dilwyn and Paul have agreed to that. So
Great, thank you. We're on the same
very
page.
much. We will amend when Matt reads his epic War and Peace out here when we get to the recommendations. So thank you very much. We'll now move. We've got councillors Paul and Harry, and then we're going to the vote.
Thank you for letting me come in again. I wasn't planning to come in, but Gareth would expect me to challenge him on his dog whistle about equalities and equalities officer, because I would commend Rin and Charlie and Chris Cater for the political and professional leadership that they have provided. We inherited a legacy when I became councillor in May 2022, where, in my view, everything wasn't right. And I think both the political and the professional leadership have been working hard to turn that round. And it's not easy work. And it's work that also supports all the workers employed by the authority. It supports all our residents, and it supports us as councillors in dealing with those difficult issues when they come up. And I'd like to remind Gareth that the Equality Acts identify 9 characteristics: gender, marital status, family status, age, disability, sexual orientation, race, religion, and membership of the Romani Gypsy traveller community, which I'm deeply interested in. And I think it's important in our public forums that we acknowledge and are positive and exhort the work we do around qualities. We don't get everything right, but as a local authority, with the political and professional leadership we've got, we are taking on that battle. And I don't think that is an area that we should underfund in any way, because it's so important to so many people in our community.
Thank you, councillor Paul. So now we go on to councillor Harry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I had a couple of questions and a couple of budget reductions, but I think, first of all, a couple of observations. So first of all, there's been some discussion around potential local authority mergers, and there's been mention that this would probably need to be approved off by the Welsh Government. I think the Welsh Minister for Finance and Local Government has said within the last year that they'd be open to proposals for voluntary mergers from local authorities in Wales. Apparently there's provision for that in the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021. I seem to recall raising it in this committee some time ago. So perhaps that is something we could take up, and I don't think we need to worry so much about waiting for Welsh Government to invite us to explore that. I'm conscious that this council has a plan already in place, or did develop a plan to merge with Denbighshire previously, so perhaps something that's something we could look at exploring. A couple of queries first, or the first one is probably to Geraint or Andrew. It's around the budget reduction about ceasing to post out the annual collection day calendars to residents for bin collections. Now, I appreciate that obviously financial situation is bleak, to say the least, but I'm conscious we have a older population in Conway. There's an Age UK report that I think says that 42% of people over 75 do not use the internet. That's a pretty significant portion. Now, having had a look through the equality and impact assessment for that budget reduction, it says that residents can access this information online. Well, that's clearly not an option for those people that aren't online, or over the phone. And I wonder where most people think about getting a phone number from nowadays, probably the internet. So I'd be interested to know, there's a little bit of information in the equality and impact assessment on that, but what additional information or what additional consideration has been given to how that information could be shared with residents? I know there's been some discussions there about the annual council tax bill that goes out, so I wonder whether or not there'd be a way to include that information about waste collections in there for our older residents that perhaps aren't online. I don't know if there's anyone from ERF who can help with that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Harry. The budget reductions we've put forward for consideration in waste are, we don't want to do any of them. All of them will affect the level of service which we provide to residents, which we've seen from the consultation is number one in what residents think of as a service provided by the council. So we've had to look at what can we do that gives the least impact, and certainly the calendars was one thing we came up with in terms of specific mitigations to that. You'd mentioned sort of with information with council tax bills, with other communications that go out from the council from time to time, and we will look at all of those. But I think the once a year, the work and the cost that goes into that calendar, which is perhaps not used by the vast majority of residents, we've still got to look at how we can provide information to people who are not online, and we'll look at any opportunity to do that. I don't have any specific answers for you on that right now.
Thank you, Andy. Councillor Harry.
Yeah, I think that's reassuring. That's something that's going to be on your radar and you're going to look at going forward. So thank you for that. Final question, and this is directed at Aaron as the relevant portfolio holder. As a budget reduction, it's just listed tourism/tourism information centres. It says review of offer. It's supposedly going to generate either additional income or be a cut of around £28,000. Now, the thing I find a little bit surprising about this is I certainly understood that some of our tourism information centres already were self-sufficient / generated income. So what I'd like to know is some more information around what this budget reduction actually is. I mean, you've got additional income, that's fine, that's self-explanatory, / service transformation. What does that mean? Does that mean some from a cut? Does that mean that there's staff redundancies? Does that mean a change in hours? I'd just be grateful if some for detail that could be fleshed out possible.
Councillor Aaron.
Thank you, Councillor Harry. Not wishing to pass the buck, but Councillor Nigel is the correct cabinet member for tourism. I'm not sure if Councillor Nigel is online.
Councillor Nigel, are you out there? No. Oh, was he here, Dawn? Was he? Okay.
Hello, Chair. You calling me?
Oh, I am indeed. Earth to
Sorry,
Nigel.
I just had to make a quick escape for a comfort break, but I'm back now. How can I help you?
Okay. Councillor Harry, if you could just repeat your question that you direct to Councillor Aaron.
Yeah, of course, Chair. And look, I'll apologise to Aaron for getting his portfolio muddled up. It's around the budget reduction for tourism / TICs. Brief description is review of offer. It says saving type is additional income / service transformation. I think the additional income part is self-explanatory. Service transformation, I'd like to have a bit more detail about what that actually means. Does it mean that we see TICs closed? Does it mean a significant reduction in services that we already deliver? I know that certainly within my ward we have a TIC which I've always understood is income generating, so I'd like to know where that fits within that. And I'm conscious that it's one of the few budget reductions, possibly the only one, where there's some confusion about how it would be signed off. It says nature of approval to be confirmed, consultation to be confirmed, equality impact assessment to be confirmed. So I'd just like some more detail around that particular proposed reduction and how it would be delivered.
Thanks, Councillor Harry. Councillor Nigel.
Sorry, Chair. I was having difficulty hearing that. Let me just change my headset. Just hold on.
Okay. Oh, I think
you want me to come?
find Sarah has come riding to your rescue, Councillor Nigel. Sarah, would you like to
Yes, thank
say
you.
who you are for the
Yes, so
Apologies,
I'm
Chair.
head of economy and culture.
Harry, can you say that again, please?
It's okay. No, Councillor Nigel, Sarah is riding to your rescue. She's here and she's just
All right.
going to answer for you.
I do apologise.
Okay.
Deal. So Sarah Ecob, I'm head of economy and culture, and tourism falls within my service. Yes, Councillor Harry, we are working through at the moment various proposals to modernise the service. So we are looking at what tourists want now and how they want to engage with us. And there will be a range of savings that come out of that. That's the purpose of that work. Clearly, the way people engage has changed over the years, and many people do engage digitally. But as you've just pointed out, not everybody has digital access. So we will be coming back to members with those proposals in due course, but we need to go through that process first. Diolch.
Yeah. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much, Sarah. So that was the last speaker. Before we go to the vote, I'd just like, first of all, to welcome Steph back in her new post here and wish you all the best. And cannot let today pass without thanking Tesney for the amazing work she's done standing in as head of service. I've had the pleasure of working with her for the last 17 years and she's absolutely outstanding. And I want to thank you on behalf of all the members and all the council and the residents for everything you've done. So I'll do that and then I'll put you on the spot because I'm just going to ask before we go to the vote, I would like you to I want members to be fully conversant of the risk around the decision going to be taken today about only 2 DOLS workers, deprivation of liberties safeguards, and what that means to residents and the council. If you could just briefly outline that, Tesney, so because I want everyone here to be really absolutely certain what they are voting for today. So if you could explain the difference, what that's going to mean, the 2 and the 4. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. I'm as passionate as Councillor Paul. So DOLS is the acronym for the Deprivation of Liberty Safeguards. That is a statutory responsibility set out in law, and that's under the legislation of the Mental Capacity Act. So what we mean by that is that when somebody loses capacity to make decisions around their accommodation, care and treatment, so that is they may be moved to accommodation that they can't consent to move to, we have to undertake an authorisation as the local authority to ensure that their human rights aren't breached and that they are not overly restricted. Those assessments are lawful. They have to be undertaken every 12 months. And as you know, we have a high percentage of older people living in Conwy, and we also have a high percentage of residential care homes. So currently we have a waiting list of 198 people waiting to be assessed for an authorisation. So the risks around not giving the authorisation, not assessing these people, is the risk of harm really to those individuals where, who are living in care homes where they are unable to challenge the fact that they're in that care home, or actually in community settings as well, where there are higher restrictions than you would normally see. So they also need an assessment every 12 months. So what we're seeing is we have about 40 referrals coming in every month. we can only possibly meet 20 of them. So as you can see, that's how the waiting list builds up. And once that assessment has run its 12-month course, we have to do the same onerous assessment again within the 12-month period. So everybody in this room today may be subject to losing mental capacity as we get older. And I'm sure we would all want these safeguards to be in place for us, should we have to, if we're eligible to meet those safeguards. So it is a safeguarding issue. My role is to safeguard those people living in the community where their rights are breached. And also my job is to keep the council safe. As we know, there have been some fines imposed on some authorities where people haven't had the authorisation. I think the judiciary are looking at something like £3,000 to £4,000 per month for every person who's been on the waiting list over 6 months. So we have 198 currently. So that in itself tells you what that's going to look like going forward.
Thank you very much indeed, Tesni, for that. I think Haringey's just been fined 143,000. Yeah, thought so. I don't know if the cabinet members, if Councillor Liz or Penny want to comment before, and then Councillor Charlie. Councillor Liz, thank you.
Yeah, Chair, as I've said before.
It's Councillor Liz.
Sorry, Liz.
First. Yeah.
Yes, it's most unfortunate that we have to make these unpalatable decisions, and it is with great regret that we have been unable to fund these 4 posts. So 2 posts now have been come forward as essential. I mean, there is it is only for the next 12 months. It's not long term for those 2 posts, which is a little bit worrying. But I think this is where we are at the moment, and we can only do what we can do. So to support Tesni in what she's trying to achieve, we have got 2 posts for the moment to help bring down the list of people that are awaiting assessments, because they are at risk out there in the community, aren't they? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liz. Councillor Penny or Councillor Charlie?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just the 2 officers will be permanent. It's not a. Is that right, Amanda? Sorry, Jenny, just to be clear.
I think we're trying to ensure that we have maximised the additional funding. Obviously, if we do badge these posts against the reinstated workforce grants, it's time limited, but we're still working through shoring those up. So, displacing grants. So we're very hopeful that they'll be longer term.
Okay, thank you. This went to the budget working group. The original proposal before the budget working group asked the question, could we manage with 2? Again, I'd be far more comfortable having 4 than 2. And like all our services, I'd be far more comfortable weren't making any cuts. But just remind the chair that there's the ability for this committee to make a proposal that we go with 4. We have a higher level of council tax to fund that, or we cut something else. These are budget proposals. Amendments can be made. And if anybody wants to propose to get a higher rate of council tax to fund having 4 officers, then that option's open to any member. So thank you.
My point was around the risk, Councillor Charlie, how much risk that they're prepared to take, having had it outlined by Tesni, but that's for the cabinet to decide as now full council. So we've covered that off. Thank you very much. We're now going to ask Matt to do his party piece and read out the recommendations before we go to the vote. Thanks. Oh, hang on, before we do that, Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, thanks for letting me come back. And I think, that presentation almost proves my point that I brought up earlier about, which role is the most important. And these are really difficult decisions we have to make. In that, based on my assessment was that, the role for the safeguarding role or a virtual head role was probably more important than an equalities role. But obviously other councillors and officers have other opinions, and these are the tough decisions and tough, really difficult choices we have to make in this situation. But as you said, my opinion is that there are two other roles at least that are more important than the Equalities Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gareth. Thank you for that. Right, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. So the proposal that we've got is that, having scrutinised the draft budget, that Cabinet approve the budget proposals as set out in Table 6 of Appendix 1 and recommend the budget to Council, but that the council tax figure be shown as a combined figure of 9.67%. And that's notwithstanding, Chair, that it's been recognised that within the literature that's provided when billing, there'll be an explanation of the split between council tax and the North Wales Fire Authority amounts. And then secondly, that there's a report in 6 months' time on how cuts to the Citizens Advice Bureau and any SPF monies are assisting the Citizens Advice Bureau to continue their services.
Thank you very much. So can we take the vote on that, please? Those in favour? Five in the room. And 1, 2, 3 online. And those against, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 against. So any abstentions? No. So
Chair, sorry, mine was old hand, so don't count mine, please. I
oh,
was
hang
4.
on, whoa.
I was 4.
So you were 4.
Yeah.
So it's so 3 against. Okay. Okay, so that proposal. He was that proposal is carried. Thank you very much to everyone, officers, members, those online. You may now go for that long-awaited comfort break. Thank you, members.